Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 7:30 regular council meeting for Lynchburg City Council. Please stand for invocation by Councilmember Nelson, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good evening. Let us bow our heads in reflection. As we conclude this fiscal year with its unique triumphs and traumas, we give thanks for our blessings, for our city, its citizens, and the courageous and faithful service given by so many. We are keenly mindful of the many whose lives and futures are fraught with peril, hardships, and despair. We pray that tonight's deliberations will reflect tolerance, civility, and a steadfast conviction to be forthright and just. We especially seek to be principled in purpose, find clarity of thought, show soundness of reason, display integrity in judgment, and have a purity of conscience. And in this time of unpredictable challenges and calls to respect the diversity of humankind, let us reject blind partisanship, divisiveness, and the intolerance that often is practiced on the national stage. Let us demonstrate statesmanship, embrace inclusive representative democracy, boldly respect the rule of law, and be reminded, as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. so truthfully advocated, the pursuit of diversity is not best demonstrated by focusing on the physical features of humanity. It is best demonstrated by intentionally valuing and embracing the better character and qualities of all humanity. And when we leave this chamber, may it be said that our actions relied on wisdom and a vision that is pleasing to a divine will and purpose. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Next, we're at a very special part of the evening, and so we will be recognizing Councilmember Edgar J.T. Pero Jr. for 12 years of service to City Council. So let me first go through this, and I want to recognize Holly and Ella, Caroline, and Tripp. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Yay. Can we give a wave? This is Councilmember Pero's family, his wife, and his 3 children. Councilmember Pero has been on City Council since July of 2008. He is a graduate of E.C. Glass High School and Virginia Military Institute with a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering. He has brought the expertise of his engineering eye and background to Council. It was often very helpful when evaluating capital improvement projects, land use, and filling in the floodplain request. He is a graduate of the Sorensen Institute's Political Leaders Program and is active in representing the city's interests to our elected officials at both the state and federal levels through both national and state organizations. And I'd like to recognize our House Representative, Mr. Wendell Walker, who is here with us this evening for this event. So thank you for being here. He believes in fiscal responsibility, smart growth, and is committed to public safety. On the Physical Development Committee, and he is on the Physical Development Committee and has served as our chair since June for 10 years, actually. He's been 10 years for the Physical Development Committee chair. He's on the Lynchburg Redevelopment and Housing Authority since September 2009, and he has been chair for that board as well for 6 years. So he's been doing a lot of leadership work here. He has also served on the Local Emergency Planning Committee and the Central Virginia Transportation Planning Organization and Virginia First Cities Policy Group. So I would like to recognize Councilmember Pero for all of his dedication and work to our city, to our citizens, to his constituents, and to moving Lynchburg forward. Thank you so much for your time on service, and it's been a pleasure to serve with you on council. As a Glass graduate also, I have to say go Rams, because we're both here. And just thank you for the citizenship you've provided to us, the perspectives, and the understanding of knowing that our citizens deserve a great city and a great quality of life. So thank you for your service all these years. And with social distancing, it's a little weird on this, but we do have a key to the city, which we will be presenting to you right now. And I'll get you to come over here if you would, so that we can kind of do this. So on behalf of, you're welcome, Lynchburg City Council and the city administration and the citizens of Lynchburg, we present the key to the city to you for your years of service. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam. If it's all right, Madam Mayor,
Yes,
if
please,
I
go
may
ahead.
say a word or two, I really appreciate you all being here. I know the main attraction tonight is hearing the comments to the public, for the public, and also hearing the chief speak. So I just appreciate you all being here for this as well. So good evening to you all. I have to say that this is a bittersweet moment for me. I've really enjoyed my work on council, working the issues, looking for solutions, and trying to find the path that best represents the people of Ward 4 and supports my core principles. It's actually been a short 12 years. I had studied council for several years prior to running, mostly through my work with the city as a consulting engineer. I watched the crisp effectiveness of Mayor Jim Whitaker running meetings and still try to emulate his style today. I remember the disappointment of council voting against the Walgreens site on Langen Road, the one that ultimately moved to Boonesborough Road and put Tom Jones out of business, and completely disagreed with the arguments council members made against rezoning. I decided if I was going to live in Lynchburg and raise a family here, I wanted to influence its future to ensure our city would be a great place for my children and grandchildren. I was all set to run for Ward 1, but when I married Holly and moved, we were suddenly in Ward 4. I certainly wasn't going to run against Joe Seifert, whom I admired and respected. Joe decided to step down, and he was very supportive of me, which in turn I have tried to pass on with my support of Chris Feraldi. Congratulations, Chris, on your election. I will say that being in the minority is challenging. I've never been in the majority, and I think there are two ways to operate when in the minority. You can stick to your guns, you vote no on everything and make political points, or you can work behind the scenes, identifying the issues you may disagree with, but cannot stop from happening, and work to make those issues better conform to your vision for the city. Being true to your principles does not mean you throw your hands in the air when something goes your way. It means working harder at the margins to influence policy better. I would rather take half or a quarter step ahead than make no progress at all. I'll give you two examples. Now, evidently, I hate puppies, or as certainly has been said, because I voted against the city's contribution to the Humane Society's new building. In reality, I negotiated a front-loaded lease between the city and the Humane Society, guaranteeing the city space for Animal Control Department for the foreseeable future, while relieving pressure on future budgets. Council was going to spend tax dollars on this project regardless, and I made sure the city received a tangible benefit in return. I still couldn't vote for it, but the deal was much better than had I not influenced it. Others say I don't care for children because I'm critical of the way schools spend and account for their tax dollars. Yet I crafted the financing plan for the Heritage High School that allowed the city to construct the project, the largest for the city to date, without raising taxes. The city is still using this strategy to fund large projects today. You can make a difference, even in the minority. I love policy, and I'm pleased to have been able to influence public policy in the broad sense while serving on city council. For instance, the Chesapeake Bay. I was part of the Phase 2 Watershed this is a mouthful, the Phase 2 Watershed Improvement Plan Stakeholders Advisory Group. So I was recommended as a local elected official to work with the Virginia Municipal League to advise the Commonwealth on the implementation of the Watershed Improvement Plan. I routinely found myself sitting between Bill Street of the James River Association and Wilmer Stoneman of the Virginia Farm Bureau. Two completely different perspectives whispering in each ear. It was an interesting time. As an aside, this group helped me reconnect with then Deputy Secretary for Natural Resources, Anthony Moore, VMI class of '78, who chaired the initiative. As president of the VMI Alumni Association, I recruited Anthony to rejoin the board after a multi-year hiatus. I told him that I would put him into a leadership track and do my best to place him in line to be president of the organization. Anthony replied, quote, "There is no way an African American is ever going to be president of the VMI Alumni Association," end quote. As of July 1, Anthony will be serving as the first vice president of the VMI Alumni Association, as the presumptive first African American president of the VMI Alumni Association in 2022. Anthony was a good friend, and I would not have reunited with him or actually met him except for that initiative there. I further influenced the Chesapeake Bay policy while testifying on the impact of the proposed Bay regulations on municipalities to the House Committee on Agricultural Natural Resources Subcommittee, Environmental Regulations, the National League of Cities Environmental Steering Committee, the Virginia Municipal League Environmental Policy Committee, to Transportation, the Lynchburg Redevelopment Transportation Advocacy Group, which is the LRTAG, which include the Route 29 Charlottesville Bypass Stakeholders Group, which I believe directly influenced funding for both the Oddfellows Road improvements and the proposed split pair of the 501-221 intersection. To tell you the truth, I raised hell about the defunding of the Charlottesville bypass and subsequent unfairness to those others in the Route 29 corridor who completed their bypasses. This advocacy helped direct funds towards Lynchburg, as well as improve VDOT's sentiment regarding the area. Chair of the Transportation Planning Organization, formerly the NPO, which you mentioned, Madam Mayor. And as far as housing goes, I co-chaired with Bert Dodson the city's code compliance team. And then also the work on the Housing Authority, which I really enjoyed. And Madam Mayor, thank you for your service on that board. It's a very rewarding board to be a part of. But of all the opportunities to influence, I'm proud of these. The work to create the Arts and Cultural District, where the hated amusement tax is now reinvested into the district. We work closely with Margette Upshur and then Delegate Shannon Valentine. We championed legislation that expanded authorization of these districts to not to just Lynchburg, but to all municipalities. Since its formation, the amusement tax proceeds collected in the district were leveraged into $424,000 in grants back to the Arts and Cultural District. Advocating to have the D Street Bridge to include arches, which is reminiscent of the old one. I'm sure you all remember the old D Street Bridge, and an important visual component to the neighborhood. Working on the Downtown Improvement Plan, which increased the Central Business District's assessed value by 84% since 2008. Holding major tax rates, real estate, personal property, and meals, flat since 2008, with the exception of the 2013 real estate tax increase, which I and Jeff and others voted against. Providing financial guidance during some of the most tumultuous times in our economy, including the credit crisis and banking collapse, through the Great Recession, and now the COVID economic cessation. There's still work that is left undone. I really wanted to turn the abandoned Clay Street Reservoir into a city park. I'm happy that funding has been designated to study the structure, and I believe there's an opportunity to make this a wonderful inner city park. Possibly, it could be used to help people understand the history in Lynchburg and those leaders that have risen from our community. Perhaps it could be named after T.D. Thornhill, Lynchburg's first African-American mayor. Also, I really wanted to turn the Timberlake corridor at Graysmill Road intersection into a gateway for the city. Improve pedestrian access, create the feel of a boulevard while still allowing traffic to flow smoothly. I thought we had a development partner that could get this done, but unfortunately it looks like the deal will fall through. I hope that in the future, this short stretch could turn into a really welcoming entrance point to our city. This area has been burdened by apartments and traffic. Some infrastructure investment would go a long way for both the ambiance and the citizens in the neighborhood. I have to say, retrospectively, I think council worked best as a group when Mike Gillette was mayor. We were collegial and respected each other's opinions, even while holding entrenched positions. This is when I realized I spent more time with the other 6 council members than I did with any of my friends. We were a good working group, and I hope the City Council may hit that stride again in the future. I really do. I see Lynchburg as a thriving community, younger and more vibrant, a place where people visit and love, a place where businesses flourish, and where people want to live. We're at a tipping point. Council needs to closely monitor spending as the real estate tax rate, our primary source of revenue, is too high. With independent cities, a citizen may feel like they receive all the benefits at half the cost just by living right across the city line. This is a challenge unique to our Commonwealth that limits our state's growth and prosperity. Beware the donut effect, where the areas surrounding the city flourish, leaving a hole in the middle. Through sustainable fiscal policy, growth of the business sector, investment in infrastructure to improve the central city's assessed values, and investment in core services, including education, which across the state is in dire need of an overhaul, we can make our city and our Commonwealth a better place to work, live, and play. I hope to keep championing these ideals in the future, and I hope that the citizens of Lynchburg will continue to support me doing so. Throughout this process, I've worked with some great people. Of the senior staff, only 4 remain since 2008. Joanne Martin, who taught me more about council long before taught me much about council long before I even considered running. Donna Witt, Margette Upshur, Tim Mitchell. They've been the consistent group. Everybody else has turned over. Special recognition is reserved for Walter Irwin, whom I had the pleasure of sitting next to for several years, and of which I made the most of by trying to absorb some of his vast knowledge. And Bonnie Severchek, the consummate professional in her role as deputy city manager and as city manager. I need to thank so many people, but I especially wanted to mention Joe Seifert, as well as Scott Garrett and Kimball Payne for teaching me how to be a council member. I need to thank my city council colleagues, Bert Dotson, Scott Garrett, Caesar Johnson, H. Carey, Michael Gillette, Joan Foster, Jeff, Randy, Trinae, Sterling, Mary Jane, and Bo, for putting up with me. To my parents, Florence and Ned Perro, who taught me the value of service and hard work. To my children, Epps, Caroline, and Tripp, for allowing their dad to miss dinners and attend late-night meetings. And especially for Holly, for all her love and support. I truly could not have done any of this without her. Thank you all, and I love you so much. I believe I accomplished what I set out to do in 2008. I firmly believe that because of my work, Lynchburg will be a better place for my children and grandchildren. And for that opportunity, I am thankful to the Citizens of Ward 4 that elected me to represent them for 12 years. I am humbled and honored to receive that privilege, and I will cherish it for the rest of my days. Thank you so much for being here. Good night. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Perro. I don't think the community really understands the amount of time, energy, effort, dedication that it takes to sit in one of the seats. So thank you for all that you've done for 12 years. Thank you so much. Next, tonight on City Council agenda is divided into 4 sections: consent agenda, public hearings, public comment, and general business. The first section is the consent agenda. This section includes routine items, and all items may be approved by one vote, and I will turn to Councilmember Nelson for this section at this moment.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. For reasons that I had expressed earlier, I would like to have the 2 sections involving the minutes of the 2 special meetings in early June carried over till July. I had some corrections and additions to those, but didn't have the time to propose those to the clerk of council before tonight.
All right, thank you. So with those 2 exceptions, Councilmember Helgeson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So the second reading of the budget vote, are these separated from Ms. Severchek? I didn't see where there were.
Item 18.
Huh?
17 and 18.
Under general business.
Okay, so these number 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 and 10. Those were all unanimous votes?
Correct.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, any other concerns about the minutes? Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So move as amended.
All right, thank
Second.
you. Thank you.
Second.
The motion has been moved as amended and seconded. Any
Second.
further discussion? All right, may I have a voice call vote? Councilmember Nelson?
Aye.
Councilmember Wilder?
Aye.
Councilmember Wright?
Aye.
Councilmember Pero?
Aye.
Councilmember Helgelson? Vice Mayor Dolan? Aye. And I will vote aye also, and the motion's passed. Thank you. Next is public hearings. This section includes all public hearings as required by law or as council may direct. Procedure, staff will make a presentation. Comments will then be solicited from the public, and an individual speaker shall have 3 minutes to speak. If the speaker represents a group, the speaker shall have 5 minutes. A speaker representing a group shall identify that group at the beginning of his or her remarks, and a group may have only one spokesperson. Each speaker shall clearly state his or her name and locality of residence, and upon the conclusion of public comments, the public hearing will be closed and the matter referred to council for deliberation. First is number 9, the public hearing regarding an updated analysis of impediments to fair housing choice to satisfy requirements of the Housing and Community Development Act of 1974 as amended. As a recipient of HUD funding, the city is charged with the responsibility of conducting its CDBG and home programs in compliance with the Federal Fair Housing Act, identifying public policies and programs that may create barriers to housing choice for members of the protected classes, and implementing strategies to eliminate these barriers. Staff will provide a brief summary of the request, and it's Ms. Walker.
Good evening, Mayor Tweedy, Vice Mayor Dolan, and members of City Council. As you have stated, this is a requirement of the Community Development Block Grant and Home Program funds for the city to certify to HUD that its housing programs are implemented in a non-discriminatory manner. In consultation with city staff, a draft AI has been prepared by the professional consultant team at Mullen and Lonergan Associates. M&L followed a comprehensive approach to complete the AI, utilizing many different data sources, city documents, and specifically conducted interviews and focus group sessions with agencies and organizations that provide housing and housing-related services to members of the protected classes. Ms. Marjorie Willow, a principal partner at Mullen and Lonergan, is here to provide a presentation summarizing the AI prior to the public hearing. On June 9th, City Council reviewed this document in its work session. Based on the comments made during the work session, the following changes have been noted and highlighted in your document that you received. On page 13 and 139, impediment number 2, deleting the low mod income students as an example of special needs for populations that should be addressed for affordable housing, and the reference to collaborating with local universities. On pages 103 through 104, transit data has been updated to include the fact that Liberty University operates its own transit service around its campus, which provides the explanation for the low opportunity score in Census Tract 14. In addition, the map on page 104 reflects the Liberty University routes. This document will be updated and finalized with these noted items after the public hearing is concluded and all other public comments, if received, or incorporated. Prior to tonight, I have not received any public comments regarding the draft AI. Ms. Willow will now provide an overview of the AI.
So the AI, which is how we commonly refer to the analysis of impediments to fair housing choice, as Ms. Walker said, is required by HUD in order for the city to continue receiving its funds. And just to give you a bit of background, as well as anyone in the audience, fair housing is the right to choose housing free from unlawful discrimination. So when we talk about discrimination in housing, we're really talking about those protected classes or those groups of individuals that are protected under federal and state law. And there's 7 groups protected under federal law, the Federal Fair Housing Act, by race, color, religion, disability, sex, familial status, meaning having children, and national origin, meaning the country from which you come from. And the Commonwealth of Virginia also adds another category, and that is the category of elderliness if you're 55 and older. These are personal characteristics of individuals that have nothing to do with housing. And if through your search for housing, whether it's to find housing, to keep the housing you have, if there is discriminatory behavior committed by whether it's a landlord or someone selling you the house or a real estate professional helping you to look for a house, whoever, neighbors once you move into a house, whatever the case might be, if the discrimination is based on any one of these personal characteristics, it is illegal. So in preparing this AI document, there was an analysis of a lot of data, a lot of census data, American Community Survey data, an assessment of fair housing issues that were identified through public meetings and stakeholder workshops conducted last November in Lynchburg. An identification of barriers to fair housing choice. So what we were looking for were any policies or procedures or programs that in some way restricted housing choice for members of the protected classes. And then finally, the document, the crux of the document is a fair housing action plan, which includes specific actions that, if implemented, would work to eliminate those barriers. So as I said, the community outreach was conducted in November. We drafted the AI document over the last several months. And we looked at not only demographic, economic, and housing market data, but also, as I said, looking at policies such as the city's comprehensive plan, the zoning ordinance, and other policies that specifically address housing and housing-related issues. So when you think of a city or community's comprehensive plan, for example, that's their primary housing policy. So where can housing be built? What type of housing and at what price points for different households and individuals in your community? There was a public comment period that began 30 days, today being the 30th day. The public hearing tonight, and it is the city's intent to submit the document by June 30th. I do want to highlight just a few of the key findings that we identified. And key findings, right? So when we looked at median household income, and median household income means it's the household income amount at which half of households have an income higher and half of all households in the city have an income amount lower than that amount, okay, which is different than an average. So this is right in the median, the middle of all of the household incomes across the city. So when you look at excuse me, I'm going to go here because it's a bit far. When you look at what the income level is for the entire Commonwealth across all races, all income levels, it's almost $69,000 for a household. It's significantly lower than that in Lynchburg, where it's slightly less than $42,000. But then when you compare the median household income by race or ethnicity, then you really see some disparities in those levels. So for example, among white households, the median household income is over $52,000 a year. But for blacks, it's just over $27,000, which is significantly less. Asians, it's higher, about 39,000. In Hispanic and Latino families, households, it's about $42,000. And what's significant about this disparity is that with household incomes that low, then there is less money for a household to spend on their housing. And if they're paying more than 30% of their income on housing, then they have less disposable income to pay for other necessities such as health care, food, prescription drugs, transportation, and childcare. One of the things that we identified as part of the AI are racially or ethnically concentrated areas of poverty. So when we do this, we look at all the census tracts in the city, and specifically, census tracts 6 and 11, those pink areas on your map, were identified as, just census tract 7, having a non-white population of 50% or more and a poverty rate of 40% or more. And so that's census tract 7, which is actually the yellow area. And the significance of these areas, when you have a concentration of high poverty and a concentration of non-whites, and that would be all, whether it's a different race or Hispanic ethnicity, then it's really important to look at what kind of policies are in place that might be contributing to that, or what kind of policies and programs should be in place to correct that. We also looked at census tracts 6 and 11, the pink areas. They didn't quite meet that 50% non-white population and the 40% poverty rate, but they were very close to it. And so usually in communities where this occurs, we identify them as what we call modified RCAPs, because if things go in the right direction, the conditions, the quality of life in these areas could improve, and if not, then they could tip into RCAP areas with higher poverty specifically. The other element that is included in the AI document are a series of maps and narrative referred to as opportunity areas. And so when we look at opportunity, there were several factors that we looked at. One being prosperity, also labor market engagement, meaning to what degree in each census tract are the residents there actually engaged in the labor market, whether they work in that census tract or elsewhere. Job access, this is access to jobs where people live in that same census tract. Transit access, community health, and school proficiency. And there's several maps in the document. What you're looking at on the screen now is the composite opportunity index. So when you take all of those factors and all of those maps and you create one sort of master opportunity index map, this is what you arrive at. And what I want to point out to you is that the darker the purple colors, the higher the level of opportunity. As you go down the scale, the lighter the colors, the lower the opportunity. And if you look at those 3 census tracts that I pointed out just previously, 6, 7, and 11, they are a very low opportunity. And the significance of this is that where people live and the access, the level of access they have to community assets in a community determines not only their financial health, but also their physical health, their ability to perhaps become homeowners and acquire wealth. And in the US, the most common way of acquiring wealth is through homeownership. And so these are the things that we're looking at when we're reviewing the policy documents in Lynchburg. So the Fair Housing Action Plan we identified 4 impediments. And the first one is the barriers to housing choices for members of the protected classes. And so if you have, a good way to understand this is if there is a single mother with 2 children, and she might live in one of the lower opportunity areas or one of the RCAP census tracts, and she would like to move somewhere else, maybe for a better school district or closer to a job because she doesn't have a car, whatever her reasoning is. Are there affordable housing opportunities in those higher opportunity areas where she would choose to move? Or is her housing choice restricted to those RCAP areas, those higher poverty and higher concentrations of non-whites by virtue of her income level? So one of the things that what we're recommending for this impediment is to strengthen the city's outreach to ensure access to services and programs for persons with limited English proficiency. So Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 requires communities to provide meaningful access to programs and services to persons who speak English less than very well. And the reason that's so significant is because if individuals with limited English proficiency have lower incomes and they are unaware of programs and services that the city of Lynchburg offers, then they're not able to participate and perhaps participate in things like a youth summer program or housing rehabilitation funds for their own home that they might own. And so strengthening that outreach process is a significant strategy for overcoming that barrier. The second impediment is the location and type of affordable housing across the city. And one of the things that we looked at was for the Lynchburg Redevelopment and Housing Authority, their Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program. And there's maps in the document that show that housing choice voucher holders are actually able to find housing outside of those 3 census tracts. So they are able to look in and obtain housing in higher, not necessarily high, but higher opportunity areas. And our recommendation is for the Housing Authority to continue working to try to get landlords who own rental properties in high and higher opportunity areas to participate in the program, thereby expanding the housing options that voucher holders would have. And the second strategy is to address the diverse housing needs for various low and moderate income persons and households, particularly the elderly and persons with disabilities. The third impediment is the location of community assets. So it's one thing to have housing choice restricted in certain census tracts. And if people if residents who live there want to stay there, that's certainly their choice. I think that's the most important word in the title of this document, Analysis of Impediments to Fair Housing Choice, because it is all about choice. But really the question is, what kind of choice do low and moderate income non-whites have? And so for wanting to stay in their neighborhoods, then there's an obligation to improve the quality of life for folks in those neighborhoods. And one of them is, one of the recommendations is to continue collaborating with GLTC to improve access to areas outside of those RCAP census tracts, so that there's linkages to employment centers, to healthcare facilities, and to other amenities, commercial, cultural, that all of us want to have in our own community. And the second strategy under this impediment is also to centralize public services in locations with good transit access. So because of limited funding in expanding routes, then think about when you are planning for where public facilities are to be located, that the element of access to public transit is incorporated into that decision-making process. And the fourth impediment is discriminatory behavior toward members of the protected classes. So this is a strategy that is basically focused on providing fair housing education and outreach and enforcement. So the city itself, the unit of government as the city of Lynchburg, cannot stop people from engaging in discriminatory behavior. But what you can do for your residents and other elected officials and appointed boards and commissions is provide fair housing training and education so that people who are in decision-making positions understand the gravity of their decision-making in terms of comprehensive plan documents, zoning ordinances, whether it's variances or amendments, any types of decisions that are being approved. Also, items such as housing counseling, legal counseling from Virginia Legal Aid to reduce the rates of eviction, mortgage application denials, high-cost lending, and other discriminatory practices. And so by whether your staff provides it or it's contracted out to HUD qualified enforcement entities to provide the education, the outreach, or even the enforcement, that's a significant way toward expanding housing choice for residents within your community. The next steps for this process include this public hearing tonight, along with council's consideration of the AI document, as well as the 5-year consolidated plan and the annual action plan. And the AI will be submitted to HUD by the end of the month. And then the implementation of this particular document occurs through the city's annual action plan. So each year, the city has to, within its annual action plan, identify those measures that it will take. So basically identify what from within the AI plan they will implement in the upcoming year. And then at the end of the year, when the city prepares it, when staff prepares its CAPER, which is its end of the year reporting document, then it reports on the progress that it has made. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Willow, very much for that overview. And if council has questions after the public hearing, I'm sure we'll call you back up. But for the public's knowledge, this is our second presentation, so this evening, so thank you. Is there anyone who would like to speak in favor? Please come forward and just state your name and residence. Thank you.
My name is Ben Blanks. I live in the Langham Road section of Lynchburg. I just want to say that I'm also a GLTC board member, and I think the city and GLTC can work together and make things better. So if anybody would like to reach out to me, I'm a board director at GLTC, and to help improve things, help improve the routes, help connect the low-income housing area, I think that would be a good thing. And if we can improve, if the city can improve and the transit can work as a partnership to improve that, that's what I would like for us to see in the future years. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Blanks. Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak in favor?
Madam Mayor, Madam Vice Mayor, members of council, Carl Hutchison, the citizen of Lynchburg. I applaud the extensive work that has been done, that has been presented in the report this evening. There is one thing that I hope that all of us will remember. In the 1970s, M.W. Thornhill, Owen Cardwell Sr., Donald Johnson, Junius Haskins, and others challenged the voting patterns of our city. And that's when the ward system was developed. They went before the Justice Department. And while everything that has been said in the report is accurate, we have seen some changes in Ward 2 that have, in some ways, not been beneficial. Remember that Ward 2 is designated as a ward that will ensure that we have African American representation on our council, and I applaud the work that you do to see that that's being done. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Hutchison. Is there anyone else who would like to speak in favor? If not, is there anyone else who would like to speak in opposition? All right, if there's no one to speak in opposition, I'll ask our clerk of council, are there any emails or voicemails on this matter? Thank you. There is no rebuttal needed, so the public hearing is now closed and the matter rests with council. And I will entertain a motion to approve the resolution.
Madam Mayor, I move that we approve the resolution.
Second?
Thank you. The motion has been made and second. Councilmember Pero, further discussion?
I think the report was very, very detailed and provide all the information we need. I appreciate the comments that we received. I think they're both good comments. I think we should take that to heart. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Wright. All right, thank you. Any further discussion from council? Councilmember Wilder.
Again, thank you for the report. It was very helpful, very informative. I really appreciate that. Just one quick question. I noticed you talked about evictions. I read in something recently where Lynchburg had a higher number of evictions than other parts of our state. Did your studies come across that as well?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Did your studies come across a higher rate of evictions in our area than other parts of the state?
I'm not sure if we included that or not. I'm sorry, I don't know. I don't think we did.
Okay, thank you, appreciate it. But thank you for the information.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Helgeson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This report, obviously, people are hearing the different terms, but it's several hundred pages of data that shows kind of the history and current housing opportunities in Lynchburg. And as we kind of look at this, I think it's fairly instructive with regarding to policy that we create and set. You know, as you mentioned, home ownership is a great way to create wealth. And some of the barriers that we have are, as Councilmember Pero said in his remarks as far as being here and what he's pushed for, is trying to have fiscal responsibility and having a lower tax burden on our property owners, because that allows people to buy the houses. The people that own the house with the high taxes, they're directly paying those higher taxes. People that are renting the property are indirectly paying those higher taxes. So one thing that we can think about as we see this plan, we can kind of think of what actual actionable policy items could we as a council, I think, do to help, not just writing a nice report and sending it to HUD, but actually what can we do? And part of that is maybe trying to minimize that burden on our property owners so people can buy houses, so people can have better affordability in rent. You know, it's also interesting and very instructive when we look at this report, you know, since we're also, it correlates with the progress to poverty issues. This report in Lynchburg says that somebody finishes a high school degree, they get double the income of somebody in poverty. And that's why it was, this last couple weeks ago, it was neat to see the graduates, and it was glad that our schools put out signs, since they couldn't have an actual graduation kind of ceremony, they put signs in the kids' yards that said they graduated. When I saw those, I went by and showed up at their house, and I said, congratulations. I'm sorry you didn't have an actual celebration, but this is to be applauded. You know, this is an achievement. This is, now you made your first achievement. You finished high school, and you got the opportunity to open up the doors in front of you. And so when we see this report, it says that if you, the actual poverty numbers were like 12,000, you finish high school, you have double the income, 24,000. And then it showed if you continue your education and whatnot, it showed how important education was. It also showed how important working is. It showed how important the fact of single parents raising children versus dual parents, how those impediments are. So I think this report was very instructive in a lot of ways that we can look at and see what can we do as a council, what can we do as a community to make to not just say, you know, can we subsidize or something, but how can we actually have policies that help people to purchase homes, to invest in homes. You know, another thing was instructive was the income. You mentioned the median household income of the state. I think you said 69,000 versus our city of 42,000. That's actually, you know, I do math and I look at numbers. That's actually 60% of the state average. And lots of times we look at numbers, we like to compare ourselves with the Joneses, but when our income is 60% of the state average, our expenses should be that as well. So I think this report was very instructive. I think it's good on a lot of facets. I'm glad you removed some of the language that we talked about the last meeting. I think that is helpful, and thank you for it.
Any further discussion? Vice Mayor Dolan?
I just have a question. Do we have like an accountability after we implement this plan? Is there some sort of annual accountability, or is it just a plan and you do what you can? I don't know who answers that.
We do. We have to report each year on
Okay.
what the accomplishments when we do our end of the year report for the CDBG and home program. The accomplishments are noted at that time. So throughout the year, as we do different projects, we make sure that, you know, we're not violating any of the fair housing items, and also working towards, for example, the housing counseling. We work with LNCAG to make sure they help us with that because they have a certified housing counselor on staff there. So yes, there is an accountability and a report that goes at the end of the year.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. If there's no further comments, I do have a couple of comments. Thank you, Councilmember Hegelson, for your thoughts on that. I just, for those who are listening and watching and in council chambers, a high school education just does not get it anymore. You know, that's great and that's helpful and that sets your path, but we need people to reach higher than a high school education. If they want to become a business owner and it's successful, that's fine. If they want to go on to credential certification programs, vocational trades, military, you know, other opportunities, 2- and 4-year colleges, that's fine. But a high school education just does not get it anymore. So I just wanted to say that it's not enough. Hashtag not enough, okay? And what I see and I look at, yes, it's not good, the income levels that we see for a lot of the housing options, and it does limit people. And I think in Lynchburg, and I'm not sure what your findings, we have a lot of what is considered working poor. And so we have people that are working sometimes 2 and 3 jobs, and it's just not enough. And so how we help to elevate in the programming for those folks, persons who are working every day, child care, taking care of home, house, sometimes caretakers to other people, elderly relatives as such, how we have our programs in place affects them. And that's something I'd like to see us continue to work on. We do have programs in place, as was put there, but we need to continue to strengthen those because we have a large number of people who would fall into that category. So I just wanted to say that as a part of our vote, and so as a part of the discussion. And especially pre-COVID, people were working 2 and 3 jobs. So now COVID has hit, and so going forward, we have to be mindful of how people are backing into or recovering in their workplaces or to jobs potentially. So that's something that council needs to address in the very near future now. So wanted to say those things, and if there is no further discussion, I will call for a voice vote. Councilmember Nelson?
Aye.
Councilmember Wilder?
Aye.
Councilmember Wright?
Aye.
Councilmember Pero? Aye. Councilmember Helgeson?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dolan?
Aye.
And I will vote aye as well, and the motion passes. Thank you very much. Next is number 10, to receive comments on the consolidated plan for HUD and urban development, community planning, and development programs. This document is a requirement for direct financial assistance under certain HUD funding programs, including the CDBG and Home Investment Partnership programs. The CP covers the 5-year period beginning July 1, 2020 through June 30th, 2025. The city has also prepared the annual action plan for the program year 2020, fiscal year 2021. I'll turn to Ms. Walker again for staff summary.
Thank you again, Mayor Tweedy, Vice Mayor Dolan, and members of council. Tonight, City Council is conducting a public hearing on the 2020-2024 5-year consolidated plan and program year 2020 fiscal year 2021 annual action plan for the Community Development Block Grant and Home Program. This plan outlines the city's needs, goals, and objectives for community development in the housing and non-housing areas. In consultation with city staff, the plan has been prepared by the consulting firm, again, Mullen and Lonergan Associates. Ms. Marjorie Willow from M&L is here to provide an overview of the plan prior to the public hearing. A public notice was placed in the News in Advance on Tuesday, May 19, 2020, and through social media. In accordance with the council-adopted Citizen Participation Plan, the Community Development Advisory Committee, referred to as CDAC, conducted a virtual public meeting on June 3rd to review and discuss these two plans. CDAC recommended that the documents be approved by City Council. Council members Bo Wright and Sterling Wilder are council-appointed members of the CDAC and participated in the review of these documents. At the conclusion of the public hearing, Councilmember Wilder, as Vice Chairman of CDAC and who presided over the meeting on June 3rd in Councilmember Wright's absence, can provide you with an overview of CDAC's discussion and recommendation for approval. As of right now, I have not received any comments, written public comments prior to the meeting. Ms. Marjorie Willow will now give you an overview.
Welcome back.
Thank you. I think this will be my last time. So in the same vein, this is another document that HUD requires every year. And this is a document that is specifically tied to the funding that the city receives annually from HUD. The purpose of this public hearing tonight is to provide an overview of the priority affordable housing and community development needs in Lynchburg that were identified through public meetings, stakeholder sessions, an online survey, and census and local data. To review the proposed activities to be funded in 2020, and that the city's program year starts on July 1 of this year and runs through the end of June next year. And also to accept any final public comments on this process and the plan, it's the two plans themselves. So what we did was combine the public outreach process for the AI document that I just discussed with this process, which a lot of communities do, which makes a lot of sense to combine resources and have one joint process, even though both documents are very separate and distinct. So again, it was public outreach last November with a variety of key community stakeholders that were identified, and we had numerous focus groups with them. The individual sections within the document, the 5-year consolidated plan, are a housing and homeless needs assessment, a housing market analysis, and then the 5-year strategic plan. And that 5-year strategic plan is the most important part of that 5-year plan.
and then the annual plan, which normally that's a separate document. So this is a 5-year, very broad 5-year planning document, the consolidated plan. So needs are identified for the next 5 years, and how those needs should be addressed are identified in each of 5 annual action plans. Because this 5-year plan then will also include that first year 1 annual action plan, in the subsequent 4 years, the city will only have to do the annual action plan. So just to summarize some of the housing needs that were identified through this process. So going back to the discussion of income and the cost of housing, in Lynchburg, about 18% of households, so not quite 1 in 5 of all households, pay more than 30% of their income on their monthly housing cost. So if you're a renter, this includes your rent plus your utilities. If you're a homeowner, it includes your mortgage, your utilities, your homeowner's insurance, and your property taxes. Almost 20% pay more than 50% of their income on housing costs. So almost 20%, 1 in 5 households pay half or more of their monthly income on their housing costs. Among renters, it's one-person households who are paying, there's a greater rate of single individual households that are paying more of their income on housing cost. And among homeowners, it's elderly homeowners. And oftentimes among elderly homeowners, their house might actually be paid off. But what really hits them in the pocketbook is the high cost of utilities and property insurance and taxes. So in terms of needs that were identified through the outreach process, home repair needs for elderly households, so things like maybe repairing a roof or a new hot water tank, elements such as those. We also identified a shortage of qualified contractors to rehabilitate housing units. So these are typically smaller jobs for a contractor, and it's difficult to find an adequate number of contractors who are qualified and that can conduct that type of housing activity. And the reason that's so important is because the households that participate in any repair or rehabilitation programs that the city runs through these funds are owned by low and moderate income homeowners. So this is what's referred to as the naturally occurring affordable housing stock in your community. So it's really important that efforts are made to try to maintain, preserve those housing units for future homeowners to live in, and for there to be a sufficient affordable housing stock in the city. There was also a need for mixed income, mixed use development across the city. So this speaks to that issue I was referring to earlier in the AI, where if there are opportunities for developing affordable housing outside of those lower income census tracts, then those are opportunities that the city should consider capitalizing on. So if, for example, and I think we had a more in-depth discussion about things like inclusionary housing. So if there is a private development, privately financed development that's proposed somewhere, then working with the developer to get a certain number or percentage of those units at an affordable rate for lower income households. So those were the housing needs. There's also a category called public service, and this is exactly what the phrase says. It's public services. So any member of the public who is income eligible can participate in these types of services that are funded through the Community Development Block Grant Program. So supportive services for persons experiencing homelessness, continued support of the city's coordinated homeless intake and access program. So getting, that's the system that people who are homeless enter into in order to access services, either to become housed, maybe even to prevent homelessness to begin with. Services and emergency shelter for domestic violence survivors is a need, as well as, again, increased transit service throughout the city. Affordable childcare options. So transit and childcare came up as two of the greatest barriers to single parents, but women in particular, who want to join the workforce, but without affordable childcare, it's almost impossible for a lot of them. Not only join the workforce, but even in some cases, start small businesses. Increased need for food services, including a grocery store in parts of the city. Services to address elements that contribute to poverty. So, and that includes a wide variety of services, whether it's job training or childcare to some degree, anything that helps to alleviate poverty and move individuals and households out of poverty. Workforce programs for youth ages 14 to 24. Soft skills training for employment opportunities, and an eviction prevention program. Most of these were identified through the stakeholder workshops that were held, as well as the public meetings. So another category that we looked at was public facilities. So if public services or the actual programs that are financed by community development block grant funds, public facilities are typically the buildings or the infrastructure elements that the public benefits from. Code enforcement, infrastructure available on lots for development to encourage affordable housing. Expansion of the rental inspection program to maintain and improve the quality of affordable rental housing in particular. Sidewalks and bus stop shelters. Overall improvement of city streets. Community centers that are considered to be effective. Lynchburg is like a lot of other communities where the public community centers are really valuable quality of life elements in terms of their programming that they provide for the residents that live in their service area. And additional parks and green spaces were also identified as needs. So again, in this 5-year consolidated plan, we have housing goals, support initiatives to increase permanent affordable housing in the rental market, increase the number of owner-occupied units, meaning work toward increasing homeownership, with emphasis placed on mixed income and inclusive communities, supporting the preservation of affordable housing in both the rental and sales market. It's not always, but more often than not, it's more cost-effective to preserve existing affordable housing than it is to create new affordable housing. And supporting the improvements of public facilities and infrastructure that contribute to housing development. There's also a series of 5-year non-housing goals. Removal and redevelopment of dilapidated and condemned structures. So in some cases, demolition of units that are beyond rehabilitation or beyond feasible rehabilitation actually does contribute to improving a neighborhood. So removing those blighting influences, either to allow for new development, infill development, or remaining as open space. Identification and rehabilitation of rental housing. Supporting neighborhood partnerships that facilitate self-sufficiency. So this is not only speaking to self-sufficiency in terms of economic self-sufficiency, but also things like helping individuals such as persons with disabilities and the elderly to remain in their homes and age in place. Supporting efforts that align with the city's blueprint for opportunity to improve the economic base, job skills, and health of the community. Promoting public service activities which support the healthy development of the city's at-risk youth, adults, and families. Also supporting efforts for services for homeless citizens in order to move that population toward permanent housing. And finally, to remove barriers that would enable individuals and households to escape poverty and strengthen low-income households and families. So, for the program year that starts actually in a couple of weeks on July 1, the city will have available to it about $1.5 million, a little over $700,000 in CDBG funds, and $868,000 in home funds. The difference between those two programs is very significant. So home program is the easiest one. It's only for housing, whether it's building housing, homeowner occupied housing or rental housing or tenant-based rental assistance, but it's only for housing, eligible housing activities. The Community Development Block Grant Program is a much broader program. And that's where all those public services and public facilities, as well as things like fair housing education and outreach, those types of services would fall under that program. So, the last few slides include the activities that the CDAC group approved for recommending to council. In terms of public services, Scout Reach, almost $26,000 for programming for youth in urban settings. The Coordinated Homeless Intake and Access System, $65,000. And this is basically a, again, a system, as I said earlier, that reaches out to provide information for individuals and families who are homeless, to get them into the system for supportive services and potentially permanent housing. A little over $16,000 for the Affordable Housing Resource Center that is administered or managed by the Redevelopment and Housing Authority. In terms of public facilities and infrastructure activities, over $417,000 for Phase 2 of the 10 Bridge Hill neighborhood pedestrian improvements, so sidewalks, trail widening, and trailhead enhancements, including in conjunction with the water line replacement. And then the second project is the Biggers Park Improvement and Blackwater Creek Trail Connection, $110,000. And that's improvements for the installation of an outdoor fitness center, park benches, wayfinding sign, handicap accessibility, and connection of Blackwater Creek Trail. The affordable housing activities that are proposed for 2020 include over $413,000 in home funds for Rush Homes to develop Florida Terrace, a 48-unit rental apartment development. A bit over $143,000 in home funds for Habitat's home ownership program to continue that, and $270,000 in home funds for subsidizing the development cost for 11 parcels in the Knott Street development for sale to Habitat qualified home buyers. And both the Community Development Block Grant Program and the Home Program have line items for program administration. $80,000 for the CDBG program, $42,000 for the home program. And these are basically personnel, training costs, operating costs that are associated with the management of each of these programs. So the next steps are identical to the AI document, as both processes have been combined. The public hearing is tonight. The end of the 30-day public display period is tonight at midnight. These two documents, along with the AI, are for council's consideration tonight, and they'll be submitted sometime before June 30th, and the city's program year starts on July 1. And all that means is that at that point, the city can begin investing in these programs once the money becomes available from HUD.
That concludes my presentation.
All right, thank you, Ms. Willow. Is there anyone who would like to speak in favor? All right, is there anyone who would like to speak in opposition? Are there any emails or phone calls regarding this matter? Thank you. So there is no rebuttal needed. The public hearing is closed, and the matter rests with council. Yes, Councilmember Pero.
Madam Mayor, I think it's best if I make a disclosure. According to, I am the chair and a member of the Housing Authority. The Housing Authority is a beneficiary of many of these funds. However, the Housing Authority does not, I do not receive a salary or any personal benefit from that, so I can vote on this fairly and objectively. I just want to make that disclosure, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, and I will make that same disclosure as a member of the Housing Authority Board that does not receive any compensation, and I feel I can also vote on this without bias and discussing the matter as well. So thank you very much. Is there a motion regarding this?
I'll make the motion, Madam Mayor.
No.
Oh, excuse me.
Very
Yes.
sorry. Yes, Councilmember Wilder.
Yes, thank you. I'm a member of the CDAC committee. I know Councilman Wright is also, he's out of town at the last meeting. I just want to thank Melva Walker and her staff for assisting this process. I've worked with this process prior to City Council for the past probably 20 years, and I'm always impressed with the work that they do for our community. We also have hopefully I believe some members of the CDAC committee is here, I believe. If you're here, could you stand, please? Members of the CDAC committee, is anybody here? Okay. It is so important for us as citizens with the CDAC committee. We have, I know Ms. Dyke was here, I believe. I think she might have left. We have several members of the committee from different wards that are part of the CDAC committee. And that is so crucial when you have your voice of a part of that table, when the decisions are being made, you can have your input. So we're so thankful for the members of the CDAC committee that had their voices heard. I mean, we would talk about different funds and negotiating how things were going to go from different sidewalks to Timber Hill and some other areas. It was the citizens that made those concerns, made those suggestions, so we can have it that's good for the citizens of Ward 2 and other parts of our community. And I encourage the citizens to make sure they continue to read the newspaper, because some person might say, I didn't know anything about this, but it's so important for the citizens to read the newspaper, because those notices are always placed in notices from the city website, from the city Facebook page, from continuing to monitor when these funds are available. And I think last year they mentioned that one of the agencies that returned some funds, where they had about $400,000 in funds to help rehab certain property. They had to return those funds because they could not find a contractor that would take on those projects. So we as community citizens, we need to be aware of these situations, aware of these funds, whether we pulling resources together to make sure they're beneficial for the citizens of Lynchburg. But again, we heard all the inequities that addresses our community as far as housing, as far as affordable housing, as far as some of the challenges we have in our community. So these are some of the programs that we're doing to address those issues. And it's the members of the CDAC committee that help make those decisions. So I'm thankful for the members of the CDAC committee. I'm thankful for Ms. Walker's staff, and we do approve this committee, so this report. So I'd like to make the motion to accept this report.
Thank you. Is there a second?
A second.
Thank you. The motion has been made and second. Any further discussion? Councilmember Wilder or Vice Mayor Dolan? All right, thank you. Councilmember Pero.
May I ask a question, please? It's a clarification on the first, on the housing needs. I was a little confused about the cost burden data, where it says 17.9% of the households are paying more than 30% on income on housing costs. And then you followed up by saying 19% of households are paying more than 50%. Now, the 19% are of the 17.9%, right? Of those that are paying more than 30%, almost 20% of those are paying over 50% of their income, correct? So instead of 1 in 5, it's more like 1 in 25.
Right, correct.
Okay, good. All right, I just wanted to, it sounded like 1 in 5 people were paying more than 50% of their household income. I'd like to ask staff, I guess, well, I'm not sure if this falls under community development or Ms. Walker's group specifically, but this data, which I'm sure is well-researched and accurate, conflicts with a report that I remember seeing about a year ago that said Lynchburg was one of the most affordable houses and places to live in the Commonwealth. And I was trying to find that article. I could not find that article. But I'd be, well, maybe you all be interested to know who what the sources of the data were behind that and why that difference is there. But I think that would just be interesting and helpful. And last comment I'll make is I love it's called the Scout Reach program. I think that's excellent. My son recently joined Scouts, and I thought to myself how great of an opportunity that was for him and the values that they teach. I think it's beneficial to all people. And I asked Reverend James Cam if there are any inner city programs, and he started thinking about it. He said, well, I think there may be one at Jubilee, but he didn't think there are really any others. And I said, well, let me know if I could help out and find some Scoutmasters that could help kind of teach and instruct. Next time I saw him, which is about a month later, he had started up like 4 Scout associations, which is fantastic. And I think it's just really great for our children that may not have the ability to go camping or to get outside and have good, positive role models in their community. So I'm really happy to see that.
Thank you. Any further thoughts, discussion? Councilmember Hegelson?
I guess once Councilmember Pearl brought that up, I did see another discrepancy in here from the previous report, and that was median household value. So on this report, maybe this was just the census tract, but the one before, our AI, showed that between 2010 and 2017, median property values was on page 137, showed a decline of 3.8%. This report shows from 2009, so granted it's a little different time frame, but 2009 to 2015, as opposed to 2010 to 2017 as a decline, 2009 to 2015 shows about a 14% increase. So is this just the census tract versus the last one was, it did say citywide median values, so.
So for the consolidated plan, the city is required to use the data that HUD gives it for that purpose at that point in time. And the data that we used in the AI, the other document, is more current.
I mean, that seems very difficult to digest. That one has between 2009 and 2015 had a 14% increase, and you just add another year or two, and it's a overall decline of almost 4%, 3.8% decline in property values. So, on the AI, it did show that we had it was on page 137, but it showed a 3.8% decline in median property household values, which is, I saw that and I thought that's pretty troubling, because obviously our job is to not depreciate real estate values, but to help them increase. This one showed a contradictory report that showed a pretty substantial increase.
Councilmember Hobson, we didn't see that in our tax receipts, did we? Not a 17% decline.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
So, I'm curious about that. Maybe, obviously that's, as you mentioned, contradictory things. It looked like something seems a little different. I wasn't going to bring it up, but since you did, I figured I would. So hopefully we can find an answer to that. So thank you.
All right, any further discussion? Thank you. I'll call for a voice vote. Councilmember Nelson?
Aye.
Councilmember Wilder?
Aye.
Councilmember Wright?
Aye.
Councilmember Pero?
Aye.
Councilmember Hegelson?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dolan?
Aye.
And I will vote aye as well. Ayes have it. The motion passes. Thank you. The resolution. Next is the proposed adoption of a resolution amending the fiscal year 2020 budget for the 12-month period beginning July 1, 2019 and ending June 30th, 2020, and appropriating supplemental funds from the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, or CARES Act, for the city of Lynchburg to cover expenditures related to the city's coronavirus or COVID-19 response beginning March 1, 2020 and ending December 30th, 2020. And I will turn to Ms. Witt for a staff summary.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and members of council. At the May 26th council meeting, I informed council the city would be receiving $7,168,841 from the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, or CARES Act of 2020. These funds have been received. The long-term recovery team, consisting of Kent White, Director of Community Development, Jeff Bandy, City Assessor, Mitch Knuckles, Commissioner of Revenue, Margette Upshur, Director of Economic Development and Tourism, and myself, were tasked with managing requests from departments to ensure compliance with the CARES Act requirements. The requests were categorized into 3 priorities, with the 4th priority regarding public education being added with general approval by City Council. The 4 categories are public health and safety, which consists of appropriate cleaning, personal protective equipment, and items to allow for required social distancing. Continuity of operation, which consists primarily of technology-related items allowing service to continue when buildings are closed. Small business assistance for business and community support to offer businesses required to close or restrict operation by Executive Order 53 and Order of Public Health 2. Public education, including technology to assist with distance learning, cleaning supplies, PPE, and food delivery items, and the related transportation costs. The long-term recovery team spent hours reviewing requests to ensure compliance and to be as equitable as possible. You can see from this chart the proposed funding and the related percentages where we tried to be equitable and make sure we covered all these areas consistently. The next chart, this first chart is the $7 million specifically. And this second chart includes other COVID-19 funding that was received both by the schools and by the city. It does not include the GLTC funds or the airport fund. And you can see that still it's pretty consistent that where we receive the funding and that public education, we're able to receive some additional funds. The proposed funding is further explained in the second document, which gives more detail within each category. And you all received this in your package as well. It further explains under public health and safety, there are 2 knuckle booms and 8 garbage truck retrofits, $840,000. And then the disinfectant, testing and emergency response for shelters and generators, a generator for Station 5 and fire department overtime. There's citywide PPE, facility cleaning citywide, parks and trail usage, additional trash cans and tables for distancing, and additional portable toilets. The facility retrofits, this is for distance barriers and separation, floor decals, hand sanitizer station, water fixtures and fountains, and security and access upfits. Under continuity of operations, there's funding. This is all basically related to technology to ensure that services can continue to be provided to citizens even when our buildings are closed. The $2 million for business and community support, and then the $2,007,000 for public education. The resolution is written to provide some flexibility between categories, since as recently as today, the city received a draft document from the Virginia Occupational Safety and Health Program that outlines new public safety requirements. So it keeps changing on us. So we're just making sure that, that's why you don't see any dollar amounts for these specific categories in the resolution, because we did need to allow for some flexibility based on how this plays out, since we only have 6 months to spend it. But after the public hearing, I'm happy to answer any questions council may have.
Thank you, Ms. Witt. Is there anyone who would like to speak in favor? Please come forward.
Wanted to give a disclaimer that I'm speaking not as a school board member or on behalf of school board. I'm speaking as a private citizen. So, Councilman Perro, you'll be missed. And for you, your leadership is admirable.
Thank you.
I say you are hashtag everyone's voice counts.
Oh, thank you.
So I wanted to bring to your attention a McKinsey report, and I'll have a copy I'll circulate for the city council. This McKinsey report says the coronavirus will have a negative impact on our achievement gap. In city of Lynchburg, we are already struggling to reduce the achievement gap, but if you look at distance learning, it'll affect, irrespective of race and gender, or basically purely on socioeconomic status, disparity in achievement gap. And I'll bring some statistics for you here based on this McKinsey report. Only 60 to 70% students will be regularly attending classes. About low-income students will lose about 12.4 months of learning due to disengagement or lack of access to technology. You can give me a car, but if you don't give me money to buy gas, that car is useless. You can give me a laptop, but if you don't provide me internet access, that laptop is not any good. So an additional 2 to 9% high school students will drop out as a result of coronavirus. So that will have an income impact later on, and the McKinsey report points out an annual income impact of about $110 billion in this K-12 cohort. So as you decide this funding, and I'm not advocating for one agency or the other, see if we can allocate funding to reduce achievement gap going forward. That could be through assigning anchor institutions in this town, like Virginia University of Lynchburg, where the students can work on the remedial part of reducing that gap before these kids go to college and graduate from high school but are ready for the workforce. So thank you.
Thank you. Could you just say your name for the record? Because we know who you are, but thank
Atul
you.
Gupta.
Thank
I'm
you
a
very much.
resident of City of Lynchburg.
Thank you. Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak in favor? Is there anyone who would like to speak in opposition? All right, thank you. Are there any emails or phone calls regarding this? Thank you. There's no rebuttal needed, so the public hearing is now closed and the matter rests with council. Council, what is your pleasure?
Madam Mayor, I'll move the resolution, please.
All right, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been made and second. Councilmember Pero, followed by Councilmember Wilder for further discussion.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is critical funding that at a critical time, and you know, it's tremendous the amount of federal support that is being given across the country, and honestly, we need it. I described it earlier in my comments. I've heard it been called the Great Cessation, where economic activity ceased, and it's going to take a while to get started again. And I especially like the program that the Department of Economic Development has come up with to help our local small businesses. And I hope we do concentrate on the small businesses in helping support them and making sure they get back on their feet. Also, I talked to Ms. Severchek earlier about wireless access points and how we can facilitate broadband downtown. I believe that's under the networking under continuing operations clause, if I can speak clearly. And that is a really good thing. Something that I do want to warn the city about in general, and this goes for the airport, this goes for the GLTC, and this goes for schools as well. Please make sure you're spending one-time dollars for one-time events, because this money will not continue to flow, and it would be a real problem to have long-term financial commitments and then no money in which to pay for them. So I know there are going to be small things, like you're paying for broadband and network access. You're going to have to maintain that equipment and probably some sort of subscription or whatnot to them. So we'll have to figure out how to pay for that in the long run. But I would hope that we can avoid specific hires that we could not fund in the future. So that's it. Thank you for your work, and this is tremendous, and I hope that all the entities that receive these funds, including the private businesses, that we're helping make the absolute best use of them that they possibly can. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember?
Again, I want to thank the staff for putting together a plan. I know we've talked about this for quite some time to see how we can utilize the resources when they came available, and also appropriating a portion of that for our school system, which is so vital. As he was just mentioning about the challenges that are going to happen with our kids not being in a regular class setting, what kind of effects are going to have them coming up for the fall semester. So it's going to be challenging, and we don't know what all the effects are going to be. As you said as well earlier, it changes daily. And I'm an after-school program or summer camp, the regulations change every week. We get a new regulation or a different change. So these are some funds that can be utilized at this time period. We don't know what's going to happen going forward. But I'm also thankful that we do have some resources. I remember when the school superintendent was here, she was saying about continuing to feed the students during this time of COVID, how if you look at all of our country, how the food banks are in desperate need of more resources. Families have been out of work. They need more food. So she's making an effort to continue to feed children. So I was so glad to see there were some funds available through these funds to kind of continue that process. So thank you for the city staff for working so diligently at the last minute to try to put all this together and also address all these challenging and changing needs in our community. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Councilmember Heggelson, followed by Councilmember Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just got a question, Donna. The food delivery for public education. It says carts for food delivery in schools, 437,000. Help me with that.
They requested, because they're having to figure out how to feed students in school, that they're not congregated together in the cafeteria. And I do appreciate our superintendent being here, so she can, if I get in trouble here, bail me out. But
So the carts are,
yes, they're food warmers to keep the food hot, and so that they will have to be serving them in the classrooms as opposed to in a cafeteria setting. And also, the food transportation costs from this summer's feeding program, where the buses will be utilized to go out into our neighborhoods to provide food that way as well.
and I realize that when lots of money is given, lots of money is spent to figure out what to do with it. You know, carts, $437,000 for these carts, once things kind of go back.
I believe the majority of the money is for the labor and the bus cost, the transportation cost, and not necessarily for the carts.
Okay, the carts was listed first, so, okay, so that's a
Okay.
small amount, is what you're saying?
Yes,
Okay, thank
yes.
you.
The majority of the funds is for the food transportation costs.
All right, Councilmember Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I really also appreciate the work that went into compiling this in a very relatively short period of time. My question would be related to, after the recommendations for the allocations were announced to the various divisions and recipients, was there any material or significant pushback or disagreement as to the decisions that were made?
No, none.
Okay, so you pretty much unanimity.
Yes.
I also appreciate Dr. Gupta's comments, because if nothing else, the COVID-19 circumstances have vividly revealed to this city the deficiencies and shortages in our population having access to the internet. And if there's anything that's been clear from the experience of the last 4 months, it's been that the world is changing, and it's going to be a world that highly will rely on distance communications and internet communications. So we've got a task before us. Thank you.
Councilmember Wilder.
I didn't recognize the school superintendent was here. She was so masked up, I didn't recognize her. But again, I just want to commend her and the staff for the work that they're doing. I thought it was so powerful that now, since it's distance learning, internet's more important. A lot of kids don't have internet in their homes. So the school system developed the schedule about different hot spots that you can go to do your work and things like that. And that's how we got to think differently with our community now with COVID and learning. And for kids who don't have nice computers or internet in their houses, they have to go to like the park or the community centers or our Jubilee parking lot to access the internet. So thank you for providing that list, and thank you for all the work you're doing for our kids. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Thank you. I want to echo what everyone has said. Thank you, because the funds came in like midday on our last meeting day, and it took a lot of people to come together to figure out what to do and how to do. And for the public, the information is changing. It's, and to pivot every week for something new or to meet a new operational need is very difficult. So to all the staff, for our departments, the schools, the boards that have had to come together to figure out some plans for funding, thank you so much. And just ask the community to bear with us because we don't know what we don't know yet, and we're walking through an unknown future. But it's going to take all of us working together. So thank you, everyone who did that. All right, if there's no further discussion, I will now call for the vote on the motion. Councilmember Nelson?
Aye.
Councilmember Wilder?
Aye.
Councilmember Wright?
Aye.
Councilmember Pero?
Aye.
Councilmember Hegelson?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dolan?
Aye.
And I will vote aye as well, and the motion passes. Thank you very much. Now we're at our public comment section. During public comments, individual speakers have 3 minutes to speak, and those representing a group have 5 minutes to speak. Typically, City Council takes comments made during the public comments section of the agenda under advisement and may refer concerns to the city manager for follow-up. Next, we will hear, I will say for the record, a citizen had a concern and they withdrew their name. So we will now hear from a citizen regarding a concern, Dr. Keith Anderson, on behalf of Lynchburg Police Reform Task Force. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Mayor, Madam Vice Mayor, members of City Council, City Manager, Deputy City Manager, department staff, good evening.
Good evening.
Tonight I stand before you filled with an unfathomable amount of humility and in solidarity with thousands of people who, because of COVID, couldn't even enter these hallowed halls of this place in which I stand. I stand here tonight, however, as a spokesman for many citizens of our community who have organized and have collectively chosen the name Community Task Force on Reforming Policing in Lynchburg, Virginia. The members of the task force have embraced the charge to liaise for the integrity of our demands for change in our beloved Hill City. It was on May 26, 2020, America lost one of her sons due to the despicable and heinous actions of a racist coward who had been privileged and given the responsibility to protect with courage and to serve with compassion. That authority was given to him. He was entrusted with caring for a community. However, through the lens of a bystander video, America watched for 7 minutes and 46 seconds. We observed an indecent human being choke the life, the promise, the potential and strength out of a man. A man who was being taken from his family, his friends, his church, and this country that I proudly serve to defend the rights and the constitutional rights of each of its citizens. In his last breath, he called for his mama. And for the past 2 weeks, I, as an elder in this community, have heard the cries of my children, help me to breathe. So I stand here tonight telling you, I stand with them. I'm gonna help them breathe. America is awakened. The America I love has awakened. The global world is now awake of the lingering racism that exists here in this country. The citizens of Lynchburg have awakened, however, and we have awakened with some words on our lips. Racial bias has no place in this city. And we leave you with 4 words: not in my city. Not in my city will we allow racism to exist. Not in my city will we allow the pestilence of hatred to run rampant in our streets. So what have we done? We decided that we, the citizens, will select who represents us and our wishes in legislation and in policy. We will choose the appropriate culture that underpins the law enforcement professionals who patrol our streets. The murder of Mr. Floyd was an anomaly. He was an anomaly, for the noble profession of law enforcement. Police officers are grand individuals. My brother is one. I serve this community as a chaplain. But I also know that this man who killed Mr. Floyd was a benefactor of a culture that targets members of the black and brown community and hunts them on a routine basis. My children have cried out to me, "Speak for me so I can breathe." I stand here to speak for them. It is therefore concluded that the following conditions must be met to satisfy the demands of this task force to ensure that anti-racism is not enough not to be racist. We need to be actively not or anti-racist in our measures in both theory and in practice. It's not enough just to say it with empty words. Number one, chokeholds and neck restraints policies must be adopted by the police to outlaw its use and provide sanctions and disciplinary actions to include imprisonment for its violators. There must be transparency in the disciplinary records of these police officers that aid us in our city. We give them the right to help us. Adopt a training model that produces guardians, not warriors. You're not at war with its citizens. Training and de-escalation techniques, specialized training monitoring officers with complaint records, mandated use of body cams, thoughts and published strategies for community policing, mental fitness of officers, a military-style equipping is no longer needed, implement a policy that prohibits the use of the no-knock warrants, and in conclusion, let me remind you, not in our city.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. Thank you, Dr. Anderson. What I will ask is that we don't normally respond to comments, but I would ask that you leave your comments and those things that you would like the city and our chief and our city manager to address with council in the hands of the city manager, please. All right, thank you. Next is general business. This section includes general items of new business. Number 14, consideration of authorizing the city manager to accept and execute a $6,647,475 Federal CARES Act airport grant agreement on behalf of the city of Lynchburg. Lynchburg Regional Airport sponsor. Mr. Lagala will give us a brief summary. Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, Madam Vice Mayor, members of council. As the council report indicates, this item involves the award of a $6.6 million federal grant to the Lynchburg Regional Airport due to the coronavirus pandemic as part of the $2 trillion CARES Act. As you know, the airline industry has been particularly hard hit from the dramatic downturn in air travel. Along with them, so have airports. At Lynchburg Regional Airport, we've seen passenger traffic plunge by 94% in April, with scheduled airline flights being cut from 7 daily departures down to 2. May has shown some improvement, with traffic recovering a bit to a decline of 84% compared to last May. So of course, with nearly 80% of the airport's operating revenue relying upon direct and indirect airline sources, Lynchburg continued financial viability would be threatened considerably if not for the CARES Act funding. The act includes $10 billion in dedicated funding to be earmarked for airports across the country to provide financial relief for the entire industry. It was divided amongst 4 different groups, the majority going to commercial service airports, which Lynchburg Regional Airport is, and that's about $7.4 billion for all commercial service airports. Lynchburg's $6.6 million award utilizes formulas that distribute the funds proportionately based on passenger employments and AIP entitlement grant methodologies. So a key feature here, the funds may be used for any purpose for which airport revenues may be lawfully used, which essentially means the airport can use them for any operational expense, including employee salaries, utilities, facility maintenance, and debt service, etc. The grant funds must be spent within 4 years. So our priority in using the funds will be to shore up the airport's operating budget over the next few years. In the meantime, that translates into the 2020 fiscal budget, $225,000 in the negative COVID impacts without the CARES funds. That's about where we'd be at if we didn't have the funds. With the funds, we're going to show a surplus of $475,000. We're also going to take $700,000 for the CARES Act fund, and we're going to draw that from this past February all the way till June. The CARES Act allows us to go all the way back to January 20th to draw the money. So we're going to take from February on those items I mentioned all the way through June for the fiscal year 20. For fiscal year 2021, we're budgeting, we're going to draw $1.8 million of the CARES fund, draw down from that $6.6 million. And then others, depending on airline and passenger recovery, because we think it's going to be a pretty slow recovery because of the economy and business and leisure travel. We're also looking for potential opportunities to make tenant facility improvements and develop some new revenue-producing capital projects. So in summary, the CARES Act grant certainly eliminates any short-term airport financial challenges created by the coronavirus pandemic and can even create some opportunities for the airport in the future. To accomplish that, Council is being asked to authorize the city manager to accept the CARES Act grant and to adopt 2 resolutions to amend the fiscal year 20 and 21 airport fund budgets to include appropriating grant funds for each fiscal year. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. And Council have any questions from Ms. Nogala before we make a motion? We will take this in 3 votes, so yeah, we've split it up. I need a motion to adopt a resolution that authorizes the city manager to accept and execute a $6,647,475 Federal CARES Act Airport Grants Agreement with the U.S. Department of Transportation, Federal Aviation Administration, which sets forth the terms under which the grant will provide funding to help offset a decline in revenues arising from diminished airport operations and activities for a term of 4 years as a result of the COVID-19 public health. So moved. Motion has been made and second by Councilmember Wright, Councilmember Pero and Wright for further discussion.
Just to say that I understand now why it takes 3 votes. This first vote is acknowledgement and acceptance of the grant dollars the council has to do for all grants
Appropriate
received.
and use, correct, yes, sir.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Is there any further discussion? All right, I will call for a voice vote. If not, thank you. Councilmember Nelson?
Aye.
Councilmember Wilder?
Aye.
Councilmember Wright?
Aye.
Councilmember Pero?
Aye.
Councilmember Hegelson?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dolan?
Aye.
And I will vote aye as well. The motion passes 7-0. Next, we'll take the second motion to amend the fiscal year 2020 airport fund budget and appropriate $700,000 with resources from the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, or CARES Act of 2020, to replace potential revenues lost related to the coronavirus disease of 2019. Is there a motion?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Vice Mayor Dolan has second, and Councilmember Peros made the motion. Further discussion.
So this allocation is actually a modification or budget amendment for this year's money. Correct. As you say, going back to January timeframe. So that affects this year, and it's great that you can recapture that.
That's right, that's correct, and that was in the act, correct, yes, sir.
All right, thank you. Vice Mayor Dolan, any
No, I
further
just think
discussion?
it's critical money.
All right, thank you. Is there any further discussion from other council members? All right, if not, I'll call for the vote. Councilmember Nelson?
Aye.
Councilmember Wilder?
Aye.
Councilmember Wright.
Aye.
Councilmember Pero.
Aye.
Councilmember Hegelson.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dolan.
Aye.
All right, thank you, and I will vote aye as well, and the motion passes 7-0. Next, we'll take the third motion, which is to amend the fiscal year 2021 airport fund budget and appropriate $1,800,000 with resources from the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, or CARES Act of 2020 to replace potential revenue loss related to the coronavirus disease 2019. Is there a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second?
Thank you, Councilmember Wilder and Councilmember Wright for the motion and second. Is there further discussion from either of you? All right, thank you. Any further, Councilmember Pero?
Yes, ma'am. Just a quick question procedurally. This will constitute the first reading of the budget amendments for both this current budget year and this future budget year. So in the next meeting, I guess, there'll be the second reading for these? Is that, since it's budget meeting, it's required, is that correct? Okay, so the second reading will be retroactive on the, and that's not a problem. I would just say, Mr. Lagala, the point that you made about passengers being down, and which I think it's great that we can use this money going forward, but it gives you an opportunity that you're probably already thinking of to make the improvements in the terminal. And what you said just is like a light bulb going off my head, looking for additional ways to improve revenues in the airport going forward. I think that's excellent, and I hope you can find ways to make it a more pleasant passenger experience, which will help people want to be there. I'd really love to see some sort of active coffee bar instead of a coffee vending machine. If you can do that, that'd be great.
We have
Thank you.
ideas in mind.
Excellent.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, sir.
All right, thank you. Any further thoughts, questions, discussion? All right, I'll call for the vote. Councilmember Nelson.
Aye.
Councilmember Wilder.
Aye.
Councilmember Wright.
Aye.
Councilmember Pero.
Aye.
Councilmember Hegelson.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dolan.
Aye.
And I will vote aye as well. Thank you. The motion passed. Thank you, Mr. Lagala.
Thank you, Council.
So much. Next, we will hear a report from the Chief of Police regarding an overview of how the Lynchburg Police Department is addressing community concerns and feedback. Chief Zudema will come before us. Thank you.
Mayor, members of council, as the chief is already at the podium, I just wanted to say that over the past couple weeks, as you might well imagine, he and his staff have been meeting with several individuals and groups, and we thought it would be appropriate, particularly given, and we didn't know that Reverend Anderson was going to be speaking tonight, until he showed up on the agenda, obviously. But I believe that the report that the chief will give you will provide some clarity and address some of the issues that Chief Anderson identified as concerns of the task force.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, Madam Vice Mayor, members of the council, we appreciate the time to be in front of you tonight to speak on some of the concerns, as City Manager mentioned, and feedback we received from the community over the past several weeks. We've certainly been listening. Kind of our outline for tonight is we want to give you kind of the foundation, what we've been doing to Lynchburg Police Department in many cases for years prior to the Minneapolis event with the tragic death of Mr. Floyd. We want to give you where we're at today, what we've done since then, and then kind of the roadmap going forward as we kind of incorporate some of the feedback and concerns we've heard from the community over the last several weeks. I've got a lot of information. As you've probably seen, what we provided you is quite a bit of information. I'm going to try and go through as much of that, hitting the highlights as I can. I certainly will not touch on every point, but if there's something I don't touch on you'd like me to elaborate on, or any questions you have as I go through, please just speak up and let me know. One thing I want to start out with saying is, we've got really a great group of men and women here in the Lynchburg Police Department that do exceptional work each and every day. I think we are blessed as a community to have overwhelming support from the community, and I think it shows each and every day in the work our folks do. Any change we do look to implement, we want it to be sustainable. We don't want it to be change that is just a quick fix or a quick policy or something we throw out there to make people feel better. We want it to be something that's sustainable, that will last for a long period of time. We are absolutely committed to accountability and transparency here in the police department, and you'll see several reasons why I say that as we go forward here. We're also committed to action where warranted, because words are one thing, but actually taking action is another thing. So as we determine things through those conversations with our community members are warranted, we will certainly take action on those. We want accountability for us as a police department, for our officers individually, and towards the community. I want to know if an officer is doing something wrong. We have 207 employees allocated in the police department. We want our community to know that complaints do matter. We take them very seriously and we investigate them very thoroughly. All of the things we're going to discuss tonight, though, are absolutely resource dependent, whether that be the resources of individuals and officers and positions or funding to push forward some of the training and other things that we'll talk about tonight. So to give you a little bit of background on the foundation of the LPD, we have a very stringent hiring process. We hire about 2 to 3% of the applicants that actually come before us. We run them through a variety of steps, as you have in the documentation, the information in front of you. I won't go through all those with you, but one of the things that we've changed in the last few years is who we do our psychological evaluations through. So we send all of our potential officer candidates to UVA, where they go through a multiple-hour psychological examination. We think is critical, and the product that we're getting out of that now versus what we used to get is considerably better. It has helped us screen out a lot more people early on, so that certainly dwindles our numbers down of potential candidates, but that's critical. We need to make sure the men and women that we hire to protect you and serve you are men and women who have a strong psychological background. Once they are hired, we continually do ongoing review for them. It's not that we just hire them and assume, okay, everything's great. We're constantly reviewing performance evaluations, any use of force that they are involved in. We review body-worn camera footage, not just for the use of force incidents, but we do random audits of those as well. We go through and we look at any critical incident our officers are involved in. We do debriefs of those critical incidents. We have just we have instituted annual mental health checks for all of our employees. So each employee, sworn officer, is going to go and see a psychologist once a year. I just went and saw, I had my appointment a little over a week ago, and that's something that is long overdue in this profession. In addition to that, we review, we have the state police review any type of an officer-involved shooting that we have. They're called in to investigate that, so there's an outside party looking into that. And lastly, one thing I think it's critically important for you as a body, a council to know, as well as our community, and this is not something on the one hand that I'm proud to sit here and say, but I hope it speaks to our accountability. Since 2001, we've had 54 individuals that previously wore this badge that have either been fired or have resigned in lieu of termination. And those are individuals that don't meet the very high standards that we ask of our police officers. Okay, so a little under 3 a year for a department of about 207 employees. And that is critical to show that we are trying to take proactive steps to make sure that we have only the best officers working here in the Lynchburg PD. Other proactive strategies that we've taken in the past, we've had our policies online since 2007, so for about 3 years our policies are there for the community to view. We've had a body-worn camera program since 2016. We were one of about 70 localities across the nation that had the first round of grant funding, as many of you remember, that we instituted to start that program about 4 years ago. We've had a community policing advisory group in place since 2015, so for about 5 years, and that group advises us on policy, they review procedures, and they review critical incidents. We've sat down with that group, and I'll talk a little bit more about them in a few minutes. We've sat down with that group, and they've reviewed officer-involved shootings that we've had. They've looked at the body-worn camera footage from that. They've given us guidance, direction, and advice on things to consider. They've also helped us develop the original body-worn camera policy that we had put in place. They helped us with our recruiting process and kind of streamlining that. So it's a very valuable group that we believe can serve an additional role that I'll talk about here in just a little bit. We've been submitting our use of force data to the FBI since they started collecting that in January of 2019. A story that just came out shows only about 40% of law enforcement agencies voluntarily submit that. We're one of those agencies that do that. We also have software programs in place to help track and monitor personnel performance. 3 different systems that track what our officers do, when they're involved in use of force or vehicle pursuits or complaints that come in. And a part of that is an early intervention system. So we recognize that our officers don't operate in a vacuum. They may be dealing with issues at home, and we want to make sure that any type of performance that could potentially be an issue, we identify early and sit down and try and address that and take positive interventions when needed. We also, as you remember, I came before you probably a month or so ago, give or take, to speak to you about a grant we've stepped into, hopefully, with Horizon Behavioral Health. We're waiting to hear word back on that, but that's a grant that would allow, if we're awarded that, a mental health clinician to go and basically work alongside our officers. That grant would allow that clinician and officer to respond as a pair when we get calls for service for folks that are in mental health crisis. And that's critical, because our officers' options when they respond to that are limited, right? They can either speak to that person and determine that there's not much they can do and leave them as they find them, or they can take them into custody under emergency custody order and take them to the hospital. But we want to be able to provide those folks in crisis with better services. So we're hopeful that we would get that grant and be able to apply that in the near future. Training is something that we invest a significant amount of money in at the LPD. We have for many years, and we will continue to do that. There's a long list of training that's involved with the initial hire of our officers in the first year they're employed, but that training doesn't stop there. We provide that training throughout their careers. You've got a long list of things in front of you, but a couple I want to touch on that we spend a lot of time on is fair and impartial policing. That talks about things like implicit bias to make sure our officers recognize what that is, what that means. Also, our crisis intervention team training. Both of those incorporate de-escalation training into them, along with several other things that we teach, like tactical communications and verbal judo. All of those are methods for our officers to try and de-escalate situations they are forced upon them through calls for service. We are accredited. We've been a nationally accredited law enforcement agency since 1989. So 31 years we've been accredited and re-accredited many times since then. That's something we're very proud of here in the community. Community policing is an organizational philosophy that we apply and have for many years here, and that has taken a lot of different it's kind of morphed many times over the years, but the key to that community policing, we have so many programs that you'll see in the documents in front of you, from a Citizens Police Academy to Know Your Rights presentation to reading in elementary schools with young men and women. But the key to all those community policing initiatives is one-on-one relationships with our citizens. That's where we make a difference. We develop that trust and build that trust through knowing our residents, knowing the folks that come and work and play here in the city, and that's something we are committed to and will continue. So that is kind of a quick recap of kind of how we've gotten to today. There's a lot of information in there. I'd be more than happy to pause if there's any questions about any of that before I move forward to kind of the LPD present day.
Does anyone have any questions for Chief Sudama? Well, audience members are not allowed to ask questions. I'm sorry. You can submit them, but you're not allowed to ask during presentations or council meetings. Thank you. I know, that's why I'm just asking. That's why I'm telling you. No, you're fine. Okay, thank you. Councilmember Wright.
Thank you. You mentioned that you submitted for the grant for the mental health clinician to travel along with the officer. And I'm sort of curious, how many people, should we be awarded the grant, how many people do we think that person would be able to serve, and what does the need look like?
Yeah, so the need is incredible. If you recall a council meeting that we had, I believe it was upstairs in the workroom, the training room rather, we have seen an exponential increase in the number of mental health calls, emergency custody orders, and temporary detention orders. So the need is beyond belief, to be quite honest with you. If we're awarded that grant would fund one police officer position, and it would fund two positions at Horizon. The one position at Horizon it would fund is a clinician that would actually come and ride, and the other one is an analyst to look at and track that. Because what we don't want to do is just throw money at this and hope it works. We want to analyze this, track the data to see if it's something that can we serve as a model going forward to seek additional funding, whether it be through the council, through the state, through federal government. So, that would be limited to, an officer's work schedule, right? So it'd be one officer position, so 40 hours a week. And we would try and staff that at times that our data shows us we receive the highest number of calls from mental health concerns. But those really are all across the board, times of day and days a week.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions? I had a thought. I know you've mentioned the body-worn cameras. You've mentioned the mental health assessments that officers or recruits or candidates go to as well. Were we also at a certain point following or proceeding to follow the 21st century policing guidelines as a part of, I don't know if this is discussion for right now or the current, I know the former administration had set these things in place, and I thought we were working towards that. And so Could
Yes,
you
ma'am,
just
and
touch
that's-
on that a little bit,
You
too?
jumped ahead of me a little bit in my presentation.
sorry.
I'll be more, no,
Okay.
you're perfectly fine. I can either address that now, or I can get to that in the presentation, whatever
I'll
your
let you
preference
get
is.
to that
Okay.
then. But you did mention the body-worn cameras, because one thing people have asked us is that there are a lot of our emails, and just for the public's knowledge, I bought just a few of the emails and letters that were on my desk today, and I know all of council has received many of the same requests for what you're presenting. And so I just wanted to let the public know that we read a lot of what we're asking, but
Yeah, if I can, I will touch on the body-worn camera real quick, and we'll hit on that a little bit more, to some of the changes we've made with that. But, when we instituted that program in 2016, that every officer in the department is issued a body-worn camera. We have a policy that was put in place. That policy had to be approved. Again, that policy was crafted in cooperation with our Community Policing Advisory Group, and then that policy had to be approved by the Department of Justice before it could be put in place. We actually had a perfect score on that policy. We've been told that policy has been used as a model for other departments that are seeking that same grant around the country. So, but we continue to reevaluate that, to make sure that, that's serving our community here, right? It's one thing to say it's a model policy, but we want it to serve our citizens here, not something that just, some authority somewhere else says is the right approach. So we do have mandatory requirements for our officers to wear that and to activate that under the majority of situations, while also trying to at the same time balance some privacy issues in certain situations that we wouldn't want to be recording. So, and that's all online, has been online since then.
okay. Thank you. Councilmember Hegelson, Councilmember Para.
I guess I was going to wait till the end, but unless you had this segregated between two sets, is now or should we just wait till you're in? But
Yeah, I've got two more segments. I've got kind of what we're doing presently, what we've done since, and then kind of what we're looking at going forward based on community feedback and concerns. So if you're okay with that, I'll keep rolling through, and unless you have a specific question, we'll go from there.
Okay.
I just want to just mention something very, very briefly. You mentioned community policing and how important it was to get involved in the community. A couple of weeks ago, well, we've had some problems. The Housing Authority, the Lynchburg Redevelopment and Housing Authority, has had some problems in the Birchwood housing apartments. And a couple of weeks ago, a maintenance staff member from the Housing Authority took a photograph from, well away, but a couple of our officers playing basketball with the kids. This was not a media event. It appeared to be just routine officers trying to get to know the community. And the maintenance manager was very touched by that and shared it with his supervisors, and shared it with the commission of the Housing Authority. And I think that sort of engagement is so important. And I just want to commend your officers and your whole leadership team for emphasizing that. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would argue, too, that type of engagement, not specifically basketball at the Housing Authority, but those type of engagements happen every day by our officers. They just don't always hit the media, quite bluntly. So I appreciate the comments.
I will give a comment on one of these, the hiring process, which I thought was really neat. I know you mentioned 2 to 3%, and I've had the fortune of being at some of these meetings where you're actually training or testing the candidates, which was, I guess not officially, but I like to call him Captain Smith, that did a great job on all those recruits, all those people. I mean, and it was amazing when you see all the folks that are coming in and how they wean them down to a few, to making sure that you get some good recruits. And some of those recruits that I've seen recently, in the where you're given a badge and they're sworn in, it was impressive. I mean, because I really liked the fact, and I've told you this and I've told others this, that it was nice to see that these weren't somebody just looking for a job. Because obviously your law enforcement are sworn in. They're not just hired and fill out an application. It's a long process to make sure you're getting the best as you can. And with now what we're seeing as how difficult that's going to be going forward, and you've done such a fabulous job seeing people that are actually have a mission or have a calling for law enforcement, not just somebody that got fired as a welder and now needs a job or something. These were really good folks that were really called. And I loved watching those last several graduations or the gun and the pinning on the badge. There's some good recruits there, and we got some good guys in the pipeline, and I appreciate what that process has been. But I do understand the difficulty when you mention 2 to 3%. It's like you got to look at a lot to find the good ones. So thank you.
No, I appreciate that. And our personnel and recruiting unit, as well as several folks that assist them from a variety of assignments, deserve all the credit for that. They do an incredible amount of work to make sure that we get nothing but the best candidates to become Lynchburg police officers. So I appreciate that. If I can, I'll move forward with presently what we've done. Since the tragic events in Minneapolis, we took a very introspective look at our practices, our procedures to make sure they're in line with safeguarding our community in the best way they can. And through looking at that, what we did is we recognized several things that we have trained our folks in for years that we haven't specifically codified in our policy. So a couple of the things, and you've heard them already mentioned tonight, we have not allowed or trained in any type of neck restraint or chokehold. I've talked to the longest serving person in our department who's been here for 40 plus years and said, in 77 or so, we didn't train that and didn't allow that. But what we've done is changed our policy, or in the process of changing that policy, I've issued an operational memorandum to make sure that folks know that is not allowed, any type of neck restraint. And the policy is being updated because as a accredited law enforcement agency, there's steps and vetting that have to be taking place. But our folks all know that's not acceptable, and that was issued out to our folks. We've also included a duty to intervene. If our folks see anybody, and again, this is something we've trained on for years and told folks, and that's their understanding, but it wasn't codified. So we're doing that and putting that into policy so our folks know if they see an officer that's taking an action that's above and beyond what is justified, they have a duty to intervene, and they also have a duty to report. We've added that as well. So not only do you have to take some type of physical action, you've got to make sure you notify a supervisor of what you saw and what you did. So we think all those things are critical and important in helping our community understand where we stand on the topic, and that we're going to be transparent with that. Additionally, body-worn cameras, we've added a couple of changes there to make sure that all of our members of our tactical units and crisis negotiation teams have to have those on and activated. We previously had not done that due to some challenges with a couple of court cases and the ability to that information to get out and reveal tactics of our officers, which we certainly don't want. But we're in a different day and age, quite honestly, so they're going to wear those all the time when they're out performing any type of law enforcement action. And over the past several weeks, as you've heard the manager say when she started, I have met and my staff has met with a countless number of individuals and groups to make sure that we understand their concerns, truly understand their concerns, because we've got to get that squared away first before we use that information to then inform our decisions to take actions. So we will continue to do that. We want to hear from our community. We have heard, and we want to continue to hear from them. One of the things that was brought up early on is, hey, why don't you guys have an online complaint form? We are in the process of putting one of those in place right now. Our IT staff is working on that right now to make sure that folks have different avenues to file complaints when they think the actions of our officers are not appropriate. And again, we will investigate those thoroughly. Some of the community concerns and recommendations that have come out, the Task Force on 21st Century Policing was one of them, Madam Mayor, and that document came out in 2015, and that was under President Obama. And we looked at that document back in 2015 when it came out, and we've instituted a lot of things. We provided you a document that you have in front of you. I think it's about 8 pages. If there's specific things in there that you'd like to discuss, I'm more than happy to discuss any of them. But we hopefully provided you with a little bit of a background on what we did and have done since 2015 to address a lot of those issues in there. It talks everything, it's a 6-pillar. The task force came out with their 6 pillars, everything from building trust and legitimacy in the community. We've provided you with a bunch of documents there, policy and oversight. We've talked already a little bit about that. Again, more than happy to get into technology and social media. I will tell you, technology continues to drive this profession, and I think will do so for many, many years to come. It also talks about, making sure that we are trying to de-escalate. One of the things that I'm proud of our officers for is, we use very, very different tactics now when we deal with critical incidents than we did even 5 years ago, say nothing to 10 or 15 years ago. We don't just go running through doors and hoping for the best. We had an incident out off of McVeigh Road a few years ago where we spent over 20 hours negotiating with someone who had barricaded themselves. We had a situation over at Birchwood and that our officers were called to where someone was actively shooting, had shot at, and was continuing to shoot outside of a from the inside to the outside. And we spent many hours over there making sure that we took every care and possibility to make sure that not only was the suspect taken into custody safely, but that all the citizens and residents around there were safe. We talk about community policing in that task force, 21st century policing, training and education, which is so critical, and several other things. So if there's anything specific in that document, I'd be more than happy to address or answer any questions to that. But that's something we're well aware of. That's something that we've worked on, those recommendations for many years, and we'll continue, again, to reevaluate that. It's not good enough to just say, here's a document, we looked at it, that's what we're going to do for the rest of time. We need to make sure that we take those types of documents, look at what's going on in our community, and adapt those as we need to do, and that's something we're certainly committed to doing. Another thing that we've heard a lot of from our community is this, it's called 8 Can't Wait policies. And some of those you heard from Reverend Anderson when he spoke just a few minutes ago. And that's something that is going around the nation of certain things that they believe, folks believe that should be implemented. And we agree with a lot of them, and I'll touch on those really quick. Banning chokeholds and strangleholds, we already talked about that. Requiring de-escalation, we train that already in a lot of the things that we do. And we're actually working on sending several of our officers to receive train-the-trainer training on standalone de-escalation training, so they can then bring that information back and train all of our folks here in addition to the de-escalation training they've already received. A couple of things that are in that as well is require warning shots before shooting and exhaust all other means before shooting. Our officers are trained to use the minimal amount of force necessary to effect whatever that action is, whether it be an arrest or whatever, be taking someone into custody under emergency custody order or anything in between. So we absolutely want to use the minimal amount of force, and we train that over and over and over with our officers. And when justified and when practical and safe for our officers to do so, we'll certainly give them an option to know, hey, if you don't do X, this is the force we're going to use, understanding that's not always practical. Obviously, if our officers are getting shot at, my expectation is not that they tell the person, please stop shooting so I don't have to shoot back. We want them to defend themselves, and we want to make sure they're defending our citizens. And sometimes that requires quick action without the ability to warn folks what we're doing. There's a duty to intervene. We already talked about that. There's a ban on shooting at moving vehicles. We've had that in our policy for several years, with the exception of very specific circumstances. Require use of force continuum. We've had that for many, many years in our training, internally in our department as well as at our Criminal Justice Academy. And there's a requirement for comprehensive reporting on use of force. Our officers are required anytime they use force to report that, and we have a very extensive internal investigation process that takes place on that. Obviously, if that force raises itself to a level where it's deadly force, again, we're going to contact as well an outside agency to review that to make sure there's no criminal behavior on our officers' part. One of the other things that we certainly support that's been brought up and we've heard a lot in the community is some type of a decertification registry. That would need to be at a state or a federal level. There are officers, quite bluntly, that we have fired from the Lynchburg Police Department that go on to work in other agencies. We don't think that should happen. If officers cross the line, we don't want them working anywhere else, and quite honestly, I don't want to take on someone else's problems if they've been fired in another community and try and gain employment here. So that's something we certainly support. So those are the actions kind of that based on community feedback and some of the input we've heard, the concerns we've heard from different community members that we've taken kind of in a short term. And that if I can, unless you have questions, I'll move forward to kind of moving forward with the LPD and where we hope to go with this. We look to the future. We want to prioritize a lot of different things. We're going to continue to review all of our policies. We review our policies as a part of our accreditation and reaccreditation. That's done on a regular basis. But obviously, we want to make sure we pay close attention to certain policies related to body-worn cameras, certainly use of force, alternative to arrests, and rules of conduct for our officers. We'll continue to do that. We want to continue to work with our community policing advisory group. One of the things we've heard is the issue of transparency and accountability. That group helps us, as you heard me say a little bit before. We think that's a proper vehicle to do that. Now, how we go about doing that, I think we need to flesh that out a little bit, right? And then we're going to continue to have those conversations with community members to make sure that we have all their concerns, and we'll continue to address those concerns through that community policing advisory group. We believe that review process is best placed there where it has been before, and how we tweak that or what that looks like, those are discussions we're going to continue to have to make sure that we meet with that group as well as our community members who have concerns related to that. Recruiting, we understand that we absolutely need to better reflect the diverse fabric we have in this community. You saw in the report what we provided there, we're about 85% Caucasian or white. That needs to be better. My call to action for the community is that we need your help, quite honestly. We need to make sure that you are helping us identify the best and the brightest young men and women of color so we can better reflect our community, rather, I'm sorry. So we want to make sure that they understand we're committed to building that trust to make that happen, and we ask for that trust in return from our community as they help us work through that process. Other things we are doing or exploring, we are working on listening sessions. We hope to start as early as next week at various community centers and places like Jubilee. I know we've reached out to Councilmember Wilder to hold those there. We want to go into the community. We don't want the community to come to us. So we're going to continue to do that. We want to make sure we understand what those concerns are. We're going to try and get those sessions moderated by folks so that they're productive, and we make sure that we're hearing those concerns from the community. And there's an education piece there on both sides, right? We need to probably do a better job of educating the public, which is part of what I'm doing tonight, on what we do and why we do it, right? And we also need them to better educate us on their concerns that they're seeing each and every day. From a technology standpoint, we're looking at a police to citizen program we've been kind of testing out, where folks can submit online reporting for certain things, and that'll eventually include an online reporting map of crime. So they can go out and say, in my community, this is what's happening in my community. That is a work in progress. Axon Citizen. Axon is the company we use for our body-worn cameras. They have an online portal that we use to upload information to. That portal will also allow citizens to upload photos and video of both crimes, or if they have concerns with officer behavior. So we're working on instituting that as well. We hope and plan, and knock on wood, I hope we don't ever have another one, but should we have another officer-involved shooting, my commitment to you as council and to our community is that we'll provide a public critical incident briefing through a video, helping folks understand what took place, what our actions were, and how we're moving forward with that. That's a model that's in place in a lot of other communities, of larger communities that we've looked at, and we think that's an effective way to do that. Training, we're going to continue to look at all sorts of different topics on training. A lot of the topics on training that have been mentioned, we'll certainly explore and see what we can bring here. Everything from the anti-racism you heard about to standalone de-escalation, procedural justice training, integration communications assessment and tactics training, or ICAT. That's provided through PERF, which is a well-recognized and established law enforcement kind of think tank around our country. We want to make sure we're taking a holistic approach to addressing any concerns our residents have and interacting with them in the appropriate manner. I will tell you that a lot of that training is dependent upon funding. That is not free, and some of that is not cheap. So I'd be remiss if I didn't, in front of you, make sure I mentioned that. We're also looking at data release. What type of information are we going to be releasing through our Community Policing Advisory Group? And additionally, our goal is to try and release as much data as we can to be transparent through our website. We're in the process of getting ready to institute a new website that's been developed specifically for the department. We're sitting down, I think tomorrow, actually to take a look at the first draft of that website, what it looks like. So hopefully in the not too distant future, we'll have a more robust website that can be more interactive for our community, where they can go and find numbers on different things like use of force and complaints and things like that, again, to be as transparent as we can and provide them some of that raw data. We also are looking at an internal diversity community. We want to look at how we best develop that community to serve both internal and external process improvements. So we're going to continue to do that and look through that. Big picture, kind of summing it up, and then I'll certainly answer any questions you may have. The only way any of this works is through, number one, communication between the police department, your police department, and the community, and vice versa. It's got to be a two-way street. We've got to have open and honest conversation about what we're seeing, what we're doing, and we've got to collaborate on that. That only works, in my opinion, if we start with what we have in common. If we start with our differences and back ourselves into each of our corners and just wait and argue about all the things, we will never come to consensus. We've got to start and find out, first and foremost, what do we have in common? Where are things we can agree on right out of the gate? Can we agree on the fact that the tragic events that resulted in the death of Mr. Floyd in Minneapolis should never have happened? Absolutely. No cop that wears a badge can watch that and justify that or defend that ever, okay? Never. You've heard me say that before, and I'll say it again right here. I'm as disgusted when I look at that as anybody else that saw that, whether you wear a badge or not. We can all agree on that. Can we agree on that regardless of what race you are, regardless of the color of your skin, regardless of your socioeconomic status or how you identify your gender, that everybody should be treated equally and fairly? Absolutely. We can all agree on that. Those are the things we need to start with and work backwards from there. We need, again, to better educate our community on what we do and, more importantly, why. And we also need to allow our community an opportunity to better educate us on how they feel about police actions that take place in this community. The bottom line is we are human beings. We are not perfect, but we are dedicated and committed to this community. The men and women of the LPD do an incredible job in this community each and every day. They do exceptional work under some very, very trying circumstances, especially over these last several months, everything from COVID to all the other things that have taken place since the events in Minneapolis. And they do their darn best, and they put their lives on the line each and every day, and I'm extremely proud of them and proud to be their chief. Last but not least, there's a funding component to this, as you heard me say a couple minutes ago. What that looks like, obviously, as we work through this, will certainly keep you abreast of that in any areas that we think we need additional funding for training or things like that. A lot of the things you heard me talk about earlier that we've already put into place didn't cost a penny, right? It's just making sure folks understand what our expectations are. We operate on a budget that you approve that takes up about 84% of that budget, give or take, in the upcoming fiscal year as salaries and benefits for our employees, right? So that leaves a pretty small amount to run an organization on, and we appreciate every penny we get, but we also are going to continue to come and ask for additional money when we see fit for whether it's training, whether it's equipment, or whether it's better salaries for our folks. So again, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you have. I hope I've kind of given you a quick, or not so quick, maybe overview of where we're at and what we're doing.
Thank you, Chief. I'll open it up to council questions on the Chief's presentation. Anyone? Councilmember Nelson?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Chief Zuma. I appreciate the materials that you sent to us and your presentation tonight, which only mentioned a summary of what is in those materials. I think it's extraordinary that Lynchburg Police Department has taken proactive efforts to adopt President Obama's 21st century policing recommendations and had done that years ago. Chief Diaz was an advocate of that, and you have carried that message as I would like to see you do it and continue to do it in the ways that you will evolve tonight. Obviously, Lynchburg Police Department exceeds the industry standards. It promotes a progressive and community-sensitive approach to policing. You do have active recruitment of a diverse field of candidates, and you expect all of your candidates to be highly professional, just as we do with the fire department, and all the other things you've mentioned. I do have two sort of specific questions, and one deals with the video footage that may be captured either by the police vehicle cam or the body-worn camera. Lynchburg Police Department within the last couple of years was criticized. No doubt if there's an event, and particularly an event involving excessive force, usually it's captured on camera. And other communities have released that video promptly and quickly and argued about how transparent they are. And Lynchburg has been more cautious. Would you just touch on the issues that relate to either the rights of a defendant who may be accused in the events that are captured on that camera to not compromise the objectivity of a jury pool? Likewise, the issues concerning accuracy and comprehensive reliability of what's being seen so it's not taken out of context. Would you touch on that as to why Lynchburg may delay a little bit more than some other places?
Right, thank you. So I appreciate your comments, and it's always a challenge when it comes to releasing body-worn camera footage. What is the right answer? What is the wrong answer? When do you do it? When do you not do it? When we arrest someone, certainly they are accused, they are not convicted, right? They are innocent until proven guilty. They've got an opportunity to go in front of, either a judge or a jury, and obviously that evidence from a body-worn camera or an in-car camera is a part of that court proceeding. So in many cases, we always are going to confer with the Commonwealth Attorney, Ms. Harrison, to see, what, in her opinion, would she prefer. Now, that doesn't mean if she says, no, absolutely, I don't want it out there. There may be some circumstances where we may still, based on a lot of different factors. But we certainly want to make sure that the credibility of that investigation, as well as the ultimate court proceedings, are relayed in a manner that allow for complete transparency and allow for that defendant to have their day in court and hopefully not taint a jury pool, because if obviously the potential of putting that out there in some cases limits the number of folks that may be able to sit on that jury pool when we do that. But I'll also tell you, there may be some circumstances where we have put that out, and there's other circumstances in a couple of the more critical instances we've been involved in where we've actually brought the individual's family members that were involved in that down, and we'll sit down at the police station and let them view that. We've had other incidents where, for transparency, we've brought in media members to view those body-worn camera footage. We've not allowed them to record that because either it was an ongoing investigation or in some cases at the wishes of the family members who are involved in that, because in some situations that's I think a triangle play situation where the use of force ultimately resulted in the death of one of our citizens, and that was a very tragic thing, and that's not something the family wanted to be put out on YouTube or put on the 11 o'clock news, and we have to respect that in some situations. So we try and take them on a case-by-case basis. We try and make sure that we're trying to balance the transparency with the other side, which is a court proceedings, making sure that those can be done in a manner that's not a tainted process. So I hope I answered your questions.
Thank you. Appreciate that. The other question I have, as the Mayor Tweedy said, we've received a lot of comments from citizens about what we should do to either defund the police and where the money should go and how much money is being wasted on armoring and building up a military-style force against our citizens. You touched on the fact that salaries and operational cost is the large portion of your budget, and the other things are obtained through grants and other programs. Being on the Finance Committee, I am privy to how many grants both the fire department and the police department gets for other things. Would you comment on how the money that comes from those grants is what funds some of the more armored vehicle or technical equipment or protective equipment, and that's not money we can send to social services or to any other community use?
Right. So, for example, the armored vehicle that we have that is used to protect our officers, it's also used to rescue citizens should a citizen be in a position that our officers couldn't just walk up to them and rescue them. That vehicle was bought on a grant probably, at least 11-ish years ago, or so 12 years ago. A lot of the equipment that we buy is on federal grants or state grants that are pass-throughs from the federal government for that equipment. And once that is expensed, obviously that's not something, to your point, that can be kind of moved or reallocated somewhere. And a lot of that equipment that is bought, that is critical equipment that protects our officers so they can then in turn protect our citizens. We are not out buying extravagant off-the-wall things. We are buying equipment that is there to protect first and foremost our officers so they then can, again, protect our citizens. And we want to make sure that regardless of whatever the situation is, we have the capability to handle that locally here in a community of our size so that we provide the safest environment possible for our community. So, I think, when you talk about, the defunding or reallocating, I don't think that's terribly practical. We've got, as you all know, we go to every grant we can possibly go to make sure that we are bringing in additional dollars to offset the costs that otherwise the city may have to incur for some of these things. And we'll continue to seek those out. One of the devices, for example, at the Birchwood barricade we had, a month-ish or maybe a couple months ago now, we have a long-range acoustic device that it projects sound at a distance that allows us to stay away. And time and distance are great things for law enforcement officers, because when you don't have time and distance, you're sometimes forced into a situation where you have to use force. So that device, bought on a grant, is a de-escalation tool that allows us to communicate with people at a long distance as opposed to having to be at their front door with a megaphone hoping they don't come out of that door with a gun in their hand. And that tool that day was used in conjunction with our armored vehicle. And ultimately, no one was hurt in that situation. And so it's critical to have that type of equipment to protect our citizens. Thank you.
And I want to make the very clear point, those funds cannot be used by the city for social services or Parks and Rec or any other community program. They're designated just for that capital equipment one time, as it may be, which would allow the city to use funds for social services, Parks and Rec, mental health, and the like, so we don't have to spend our taxpayers' money buying those things.
That's correct. And, that when we get any type of grant, state or federal grant, it is very specific to what we requested, and there are very stringent reporting requirements that we have to prove that it was spent the way we requested it, as well as audited pretty regularly. So, yeah, you're absolutely correct.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Mayor. That's all.
Thank you. Councilmember Wilder and, Councilmember Wright. Okay, I'm trying to think. Okay, Councilmember Pero, followed by Councilmember Wright, and then Councilmember Wilder. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. I'll be really brief. Wanted to bring up Reverend Keith Anderson's comment. I think I heard him paraphrase or quote a section of a code of policing that I remember seeing at one of your police memorial services years ago. I think it was written by somebody from Great Britain. But the key statement that Reverend Anderson mentioned was the power of policing is derived from the consent of the public. Absolutely. I think that's a tremendous and powerful statement, and he is absolutely correct in saying that. I have all the faith and confidence in you, that your integrity, your leadership staff's integrity, and the integrity of the officers that are working for the Lynchburg Police Department, putting their lives on the line. However, public sentiment, that faith has been shaken, and people are naturally going to question, what does it mean to be a police officer in the city of Lynchburg? The presentation that you've given, I think, outlines all the steps that you're taking. I think they're exactly the right steps, as best that I know in this situation. And I think it's incumbent upon you and your team to really rebuild and reconnect that trust. And it sounds like you're taking all the steps as you're doing so. But I just wanted to commend you for that. I know you're acutely aware of it, and I think that this is probably going to be the challenge of your career as the chief of police, is to reestablish and reaffirm the trust with the citizens. And I feel certain that council's going to hold the manager accountable for that, and she'll in turn hold you accountable for it. And I have all the faith and confidence because I've talked to your people, I've talked to your staff. You've taken the steps required to remove those people that don't meet your standards. So I believe firmly that it's there, and it just needs to be reproved to our community. And I wish you all the best in that. Thank you for your work.
I appreciate your comments. And we tell every officer when we swear them in that this badge right here is a symbol of the public's trust. Exactly what you said, and that's in every swearing-in ceremony we do. And the challenge that we faced is we have not been able to interact with our community over the last several months like we normally do because of COVID. And I cannot wait till I don't have to stand here wearing a mask and seeing all of you wearing masks, and I can't wait till we get past this. I know we need to take the precautions, obviously, that we do for health reasons, but it's strained our ability to be out in the community over the last several months doing a lot of the community engagement activities we normally do. So thank you.
All right, Councilmember Wright.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thanks, Chief, for the briefing. And I also want to thank you and your team for your presence and accessibility over the past several weeks, and really being willing to engage with the community in this conversation, and for a thoughtful, sort of forward-looking vision for this department that adapts to the community's needs. So I really appreciate that approach. Can you speak a little more to the diversity within the department? I know you touched on it, and it's certainly touched on the materials here, and what you and your team are thinking about in terms of improving diversity within the department?
Yeah, and very candidly, we're woefully behind on diversity, right? You don't need to do anything but look around when you see officers in uniform to see that. We're actively out, our personnel and recruiting folks are actively out trying to go to areas where they think we have a better, so for example, we're going to more military recruiting fairs. We are seeing a higher percentage of applicants of people of color from those than we are seeing through other traditional routes. We'll continue to explore looking at historically black colleges. And those are all great, but what I really want to see is I want to see young men and women of color who grew up here in Lynchburg, right? Because they know the community, they know the concerns, they know the challenges. It doesn't mean we can't get great candidates from outside of Lynchburg. We get those too, right? But we have got to partner with our community leaders. My challenge, I always tell people when I speak in front of groups like that, is if I could get every person in that group to just bring me one strong candidate, right? Just one, we would be leaps and bounds ahead. So we're going to continue to do that. We're going to try and obviously target areas where we believe, not just geographical areas, but certainly go to groups that we can get in front of to speak and encourage folks in the community to partner with us. We are your partners, we are your protectors, and I'm asking a call to action for our community leaders to please help us with that. We absolutely need that, and we're going to continue to go. We go as far away as New York City sometimes, to John Jay College up there, and up and down the East Coast to try and recruit, to do everything we can to bring in the most diverse folks that we can to the community.
And you're also thinking, I would imagine, also about, once you have a really talented person on your team, you think about, how you encourage diversity within the ranks,
right,
and certainly within promotions.
Right, and that's one of the things you heard me mention was kind of a diversity committee within the department to see what are we doing or what are we not doing that is either helping or hindering some of our minority officers and officers of color from advancing, because we need to have representation throughout the department, not just get them in the door and we've met the percentage that we now represent the community. We need to carry that through the organization. So absolutely.
And then may I ask Alice just one more quick question, which is the president's report on policing, 21st century policing, brings up the guardian versus like the warrior mentality, and I'm curious how the department really lives that principle in its culture, and how you all reinforce it and really live it on the streets as well.
Right. So I think the guardian versus warrior mentality is another one of these dichotomies that is so simple for people to say you have to be one or the other. You have to either be a guardian all the time or you have to be a warrior all the time, and I don't think it's that simple. Absolutely, we want to have folks that are guardians of our community, no question about it. But we also have to recognize the very clear reality that there is evil in our country, there is evil in our city sometimes, and there are some bad people that want to do bad things to our citizens and sometimes bad things to our officers. So they've got to be trained, equipped, and prepared to defend themselves and defend others. But 90+% of the time when our officers interact, much greater than that really, so if you look at our numbers really carefully, the use of force that our officers have, over all the interactions that we have with our community members, our officers use force in less than 0.1% of their interactions with our community. So that tells me that the overwhelming majority of the time, our officers do a darn good job of being guardians, right? Incredible job of being guardians, and that is absolutely their role, but they do also need to be prepared at the same time. So we try and give them a very balanced approach to their training, because that's really what it boils down to, right? How well do we train them, and what types of training do we give them? Making sure they understand the importance of relationships, making sure they understand that when possible we're going to de-escalate situations, and absolutely that's our goal to do that. But also be prepared that should evil show its ugly face, that they are equipped and trained to address that and deal with that.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, one more last quick question, which is, so before we came in this evening, we got a letter from the RISE Advocacy and Action Committee, which I believe you've been having conversations with, and this is sort of to put a finer point on what Councilmember Nelson raised, which is a request to shift funds within the department's 2021 budget. And I'll read here. We request that funding currently allocated for the militarization of any kind, weapons, including guns, batons, tanks, tear gas, and other chemical dispersants, be moved directly toward additional training of our law enforcement. And I know you sort of addressed in a slightly different angle Councilmember Nelson's question about how some of these items come to us through grants and not using city funds. But I'm wondering, and we certainly don't have discretion about how those funds would be used, but I'm wondering if you can address, given that what you said about 84% of the department's budget is on staff and benefits, if you can address sort of that question and that request and what it would mean for the department. And I know I'm not asking you to like give us a budget presentation here, but if you could try to like approximate something.
Yeah, we're running the police department on about $2.8 million operating, give or take. And that is everything. That is from buying uniforms and equipment and gear and cars and fuel and you name it all. That's paying the electric bill, that's buying paper and pens and pencils, that's every piece of equipment that we have in the department, from a desk to a chair to you name it. So that, I know that may sound like a lot of money, but for a 207-person operation that is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that goes pretty quickly, quite honestly. So to take and reallocate or defund that, some of the items you mentioned, and I didn't capture all of them, but some of the items you mentioned are items that are used to protect our officers, again, so that they can then protect our citizens. And not having the access or the ability to do that, even with the items we have and how our officers are equipped and how well trained they are, they still get hurt quite a bit because we're asking our officers to do some very dangerous activities. And during some of the unfortunate incidents that we saw a few weeks back, we had an officer go to the hospital with some of that protective equipment on and using some of the things that were mentioned there, and still got hurt. Right? We had our armored vehicle with officers in it get shot 5 times. Right? So when I hear people talk sometimes about saying that, well, we don't need those things. Okay. My question back is, how exactly do we deal with that situation if we don't have those things then, right? So we've got to have the tools and the equipment to keep our officers safe. And I know I keep saying this like a broken record, but if they are safe, they can then keep our citizens, our residents, our visitors, and everybody in this community safe. And I think that's critical.
Yeah. I really appreciate your all's willingness to continue the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Wilder.
Again, I want to thank you for the work that you and the great persons do and your staff to help protect our city. This is a challenging time for everyone between pandemic and COVID and everything else that's going on. So I commend you for your staff, for your continued work. I was watching one thing on Facebook, and they were saying we need a community team of some sort. I was like, well, we have the CAT team. So a lot of people just don't know about the things that we do have, or the times all summer long of last year, how you were there twice a week, once a week, whatever, at different community centers, at different events, from passing up the bicycles to different events at all the community centers. So many things you have continued to do. So I commend you on the work you have been doing in our community. And I think it's important to see that we as a community and the police department is ahead of issues as far as the issues in our country and our nation. So you're addressing a lot of the issues. Thank you so much for the report. I was able to read over this and see how a lot of the concerns from the committee prior, they're being addressed in this report. I think it'd be helpful to give that committee and the other ones you're working with a copy of the report so they can just see what you are currently doing. Sometimes it's just we're not knowledgeable of all the tools you have. Like I went to the Policemen's Foundation event, and it's like 20 or 30 partners you have, from Jubilee to Boys and Girls Club to so many groups that you're partnering with. I think it's important for persons to see that information so they can see what we are doing as far as community policing, what we are doing in our community to make it an impact, to bond those relationships with persons. Like from the gentleman, the police officer who was doing the drums at Heritage with the band, things of that nature, versus the guys playing basketball, guys and females playing basketball at Birchwood or whatever the case might be. But again, we have to continue to inform community about the progress that we are making in our community. And you've addressed so many things from the 21st century policing to the various other issues. You are addressing a lot of those, and also even making complaints online. So you listen to the concerns, listen to the comments. So you're even having some complaint situations online. So again, no one's perfect. So we all need to have improvements. No staff member is going to be doing everything perfect correct the whole time. So it's good to have some safety measures in place for those who might need additional training or might need some support. So you have those processes online so a person can be comfortable to say, what is the process if something happens that's not proper? So you have a process in place that people can see, that they can go to and fulfill those requirements needed if they do have some concerns to make you aware of, so we can all have a better community, so we can have a better team. I really appreciate that. And I know you mentioned also about working with Horizon on some behavior therapists, I guess, working with a citizen who might be having some challenges mentally or whatever. Is that a current grant, or is that something you're currently doing right now?
So that's a grant we brought before you about a month or so ago. We're waiting to hear. We should hear in the fall on that, whether that's approved or not, to your grant. And my hope is that's kind of more or less of a pilot program. I think it's something that we could expand. Obviously, funding is a challenge as always, right?
Yes.
But the whole idea is we're going to track the analytics and the data on that to make sure we can show. My goal with that is those huge numbers I showed you guys with ECOs and TDOs, that will take those numbers down, because instead of our officers taking those folks into custody, the mental health professional that's riding with the officer will say, hey, we can get Mr. or Mrs. Smith into this type of treatment or into that, and we don't have to do that. And it's much less traumatic on them than being, quite honestly, put in handcuffs, put in a police car, and taken over to the hospital for treatment. So.
And I think that is so important also in the process of that program. Be good, helpful to have maybe some therapists who have some specialties in work with the minority population, so they can help de-escalate those situations and maybe understand the trauma that person may be dealing with. I think all those, just an understanding and the importance of knowledge about the community, I think that's important. So again, I appreciate the work you and your staff and your team does for our community citizens. Again, my brother was a policeman in Philadelphia for years before he went to DOJ, so I understand as a family member the sacrifice that the family members have to make as well. Absolutely. But again, right now, this time period, I saw the issues from this past couple of weeks, and it is challenging for everyone in our community, especially those who are on the front line and putting your life on the line, and for all those situations that have been going forth. So I commend you and the staff for the work you're doing, and I commend you for being ahead of things and addressing those issues. We could have hit back and waited for other persons, but you have taken a jump on these issues and started addressing them. And now we have a framework to work with where we can give these to the community members that they know about these issues and how you are addressing those as a community, and how can we fine-tune them even better. Right. And I think we together, we're so much stronger when we work together, when we listen to people, when we let people know the great things that you are doing, so they can say, well, we're doing this, we're doing that. Something is, again, it's like a lack of knowledge. But thank you for your work in the community. Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, Councilmember Hagelson?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I guess pre-COVID, every Sunday there used to be football games. And every Monday, there were people talking about what happened the day before. And that's where the Monday morning quarterback came in. And everybody would say, aha, you shouldn't have done that, or you shouldn't have done this. And with that, we've seen a lot of that over time recently, not with football, but what your officers are going through. And, when I've been on lots of ride-alongs, and when you go through those ride-alongs, and as you mentioned, 0.1%, there's no use of force or no excessive force. It's good interactions, but when you go out and you do a ride-along and some of the citizens see some of the evil that's happening, my goodness. Or you go through the assimilation drills where you're actually watching a screen and you decide in a split second, not as the Monday morning quarterback, but as the person having to decide right then, is that a bad person? Is that a gun? Or is that a cell phone? Is that something totally different? And they have to make those split-second decisions. I applaud them. And we should be thanking them and thanking you. We get some emails, which I can understand, people talking about the defunding. My goodness. We're going to need to pump in lots more money if we're going to make sure Lynchburg stays safe, because it's going to be very difficult. When you have officers of the front line that are out there and they're now debating, what should they do? Are they worried about getting a lawsuit against them? That's not something we want to be seeing. We want to make sure, as you mentioned, that they're safe and so they can keep our citizens safe. That's the whole purpose. And so when I'm seeing these kind of things, and for us to, or to hear something that obviously every officer, every person is condemned, and nobody likes stereotypes. And so we can't stereotypically dump everybody in a bucket because of the bad actions of one terrible person 1,200 miles away. And so our officers are out there doing it. And we need to be thanking them. We need to be understanding. I'm thankful that you mentioned about having the psychologist, not because of they need therapy or something, but my goodness, I mean, when you go to battle, and when you're seeing some evil things that are done to people, to children, to people that are shot and killed and maimed, and they have to see it, and then they got to go back home to their families and eat supper. I mean, my goodness, that's where PTSD comes. It's not just in the battlefield over in Afghanistan or, Guadalcanal. I mean, this is here. That's our first responders that are there. And so I'm thankful that you have that to say, look, here's what we can do to maybe help, because it's a tough thing. And the last thing I want to see is people jumping on because of stereotypes. I mean, that is wrong. I mean, we talk about how bad that is on every facet. And I'm thankful that they're out there giving 110%. I'm glad that you're having an open and honest conversation. I mean, that is what's important. And an open, honest conversation doesn't take stereotypes, doesn't take one isolated case and say that's everything, so therefore we need to change funding. Anyway, I think we need to be wise. We need to be judicious. I'm thankful that your officers are there. I'm thankful that you're there helping to protect our citizens, helping to protect us, and I thank them. Again, it's just, I recognize the time. But again, we look at things honestly, openly. I mean, that's why we're having a conversation. We're not going to just say because of the bad actions of one, everybody's lumped into that bucket. That doesn't fly here. I'm thankful that Lynchburg has a great police department, the accreditation that's been there, and we're going to actually need to figure out ways that we can actually probably fund more, because it's going to be difficult to recruit. We've already had difficulty recruiting and retaining these good officers. We got to retain them. We got to retain good ones that have not just fresh, but are experienced, and they understand how to de-escalate. They understand when to use force, when not to use force. They can, a rookie, maybe not. So, I mean, we're going to need that. We're going to not need to be talking about defunding. We're going to need to realize how we need to increase those funds so we can keep the best and the brightest here. Because I want our citizens to be safe. I want your officers to be safe. That's the whole purpose. So, thank you for the presentation and the open, honest dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor Dolan.
Thank you very much. Well, the hour's late, and you've been standing there for a really long time, so I'm not going to say a whole lot, except I want to thank you for the extraordinary report. And I, like Councilmember Pero, really trust your integrity and think you have an impeccable integrity. Throughout all of this, and certainly Councilmember Nelson's questions to you, you really answered every question from every email that I've received over the past couple of weeks, and I really thank you for that. And I just want to have you know that I totally support our police department and what you're doing, and I appreciate all the steps that you've taken to make sure that things are done appropriately. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Just bear with me, because I have a few notes here. I thank you for the presentation, and I've been supportive of the presentation, not kind of knowing what was coming, but just the fact that we are a community that listens to each other, and we need to continue to listen to each other. And across this country, a lot of us have been traumatized by what was seen, but then there are many who have known for a long time that that wasn't the first, and it has been traumatizing with every victim of the violence and of the situations. And so that being said, I mean, I am praying that the nation is going to stay awake for being involved and engaged. Many of the things that you have mentioned, you have talked about, we know as council members that we voted to put these things in place. Body-worn cameras, additional positions in the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office, having people software, the ability to record, but also hold the footage. I mean, we've been discussing these things since, like you said, 2015. And so when individual situations arise, when community concerns come up, there are examples of going back to say, either you've called community members to say, can we pull everyone together to understand what happened here, or people have been able to see the footage. So I think listening to understand where we are, how we got here for our community is very important. There are things that we're already doing, you've mentioned, that the community is expecting and demanding. Can we be better? Can we improve? Can we put it into a policy regulation? It may have been a practice, but we can go back historically and say it wasn't done in a practice. I think what you and I have talked about is that sometimes people's personal experiences, when emotions are involved, people have different accounts of what happened. So that footage, everyone has video camera now, is very crucial. I have said it before in recent interviews, and I'll tell people right now, to the public, to those sitting here, I am not for defunding police. The reasons have been stated before. Reform, I think, is what we're looking to move toward as far as those things that we need to put in alignment, that the community is expecting, that we believe should be happening for our city and our residents. And the reasons have been mentioned already, so I won't repeat that. We talked about the 21st century policing that the former administration, President Obama's administration, had put in place, that we are seeing is now resurfacing as a need for continuation. And so I applaud that we were putting those things in place before maybe other DOJ directives or things change. But I ask that we continue to put those things in place. You've gone through the 8 can't wait policies, the 21st policing. You've addressed the things that the group have talked about. Again, are we perfect? No. People knowing that there was a community action team, and what is the status of that team?
Yeah, so good question, thank you. That's kind of been on my list that I failed to mention earlier. So that, after the tragic events in Minneapolis and due to kind of some unrest here and not knowing, we reallocated that unit back to patrol. And we have since, within the last week or so, don't quote me on the date, but I believe about a week ago or so, we put them back in their traditional assignment, which is as a community action team. I will still tell you that group is not fully staffed due to some of our staffing challenges and recruiting challenges. And that group does incredible work. I don't need to preach to this choir about that, right? They are out there and they have the ability to not be driven by calls for service. They're not running call to call to call, which a lot of our officers are, which challenges our community policing, right? To build relationships, you got to have time to sit and talk to people, not just show up at a call, put the fire out and go on to the next call, right? So the community action team is back in their primary assignment, but their staffing is limited due to some of our challenges. But that is a group that, as regulations allow, under the governor's orders, that we're going to be back out in the community as much as we can, frequently as we can, and that's a unit that could use a significant amount more staffing, and that'll lead in. I'm back before you next month to talk about our workload assessment, and we'll talk through a lot more information and detail about that. But yeah, we realize the impact of that group, and it's been sorely missed for a lot of different reasons, COVID and some of the other reasons. But
thank you, and I bring that up because I do know the conversation was held recently about having to kind of move officers into other roles because of the staffing issues and concerns. Right. And so that kind of leads me to also let me see, my notes are all over the place. But the competition with the private market that we have here for officers. So we can recruit and train the best of officers, but we have private companies here that can start officers out at $20,000 to $30,000 more often than we can pay, or depending on their experience. So we are in competition, even locally, for police officers with many or several of our private market industries here. So these are the things I want people to understand, because if you don't have a complete understanding of what the picture is or how the picture, we get to a staffing level and that sort of thing, because some of us have sat around it for years understanding the information, it's important that the public understands that those funds and how they're spent, and salaries and benefits, and why it's competitive. And that when we need an officer, we expect an officer to respond. If it's to my house or a family member's or a friend's house or just situations, accidents, and we have grown as a city. So I can't say that we have kept up with the number of officers needed in the sense for the growth that we've had. So that's something else I think citizens need to understand as well. And officers do have a mental health crisis team that respond as well when we have citizens who are in a crisis distress mode.
Yeah, so we, right now, last count, and don't quote me exact numbers, but roughly 100 of our officers have been trained in crisis intervention team training. The goal is obviously to get everyone trained in that. The challenge is the turnover, quite honestly. You know, as we train some of them got trained, leave, or go on to other things, but we're going to continue to do that. The challenges of late, I hate to keep blaming COVID on everything, but, you know, we've not been able to run a crisis intervention team training. It's a 40-hour training, a full week training we put our folks through, and we've not been able to run any of those classes for several months due to COVID, but our hope is we can get those fired back up here soon and get those going again, because that is a critical thing. That's something that every officer needs to have to better assess situations. And the training they get there is great for mental health, but it also serves them across the spectrum. It's not just to deal with mental health folks. It gives them a good background to deal with any situation.
Okay, thank you. And I know the time is late, but I think this is important enough to stay. And I know council members respond and talk to citizens and will attend extra meetings. You all have had extra meetings. And so I want the viewing audience to kind of hang in here for a minute, okay? So I know I attended a 10-week Citizens Academy class. And I know it went away for a minute and then it came back, but it was very educational for me to understand the role of officers, how they respond, why they do some of the things they do. And could you speak to that? Do we have a current Citizens Academy? Is it one coming up?
Yeah,
how
we're
often?
Hoping to get one put up in the fall. We've kind of been holding off, quite honestly, to see what happens again with the pandemic and where that goes. That is a critical thing that we would encourage every citizen to take advantage of. We do things, in fact, through the gracious efforts of this body with funding, we just purchased a new, what's called FATS machine, a firearms training simulator. That is, I think, what Council Member Helgeson was speaking of earlier. And that puts you as a citizen in those situations where you have to make a split-second decision. And you know, I can tell you about that until I'm blue in the face, but to have you actually do that is, I think, an eye-opening experience. And then, of course, we talk about all the other things that we do, a lot of the stuff we've talked about here tonight, and give you firsthand experience. So, yeah, we hope to get that, assuming the pandemic will allow, up and running again in the fall and get those. We've been running those for over 20 years. We've been doing those in this community, and we continue to plan to do that as soon as we're able to do that.
And it is a commitment by citizens because it
Absolutely.
was a 10-week class when I did it. Is it still 10 weeks?
I think it may be 8 now. Don't quote
8
me on
weeks.
that, but yeah,
Okay.
it's definitely a commitment. One night a week for several hours for about 8 weeks, and but it's an eye-opening experience, and I think it's, to your point, something every citizen should take advantage of. It costs absolutely nothing to the citizen other than their time.
Thank you. Also, I know there's been discussion about how so many police calls are calls for a social service situation, a mental health situation. So is there any conversation about evolving some forms of response to include other departments or areas where we know that a lot of families in distress, children in distress, other people are better equipped?
Right, and you know, those are that's the initiative behind the grant we spoke about earlier from the mental health side. But to your point, it's not just mental health, right? There's a lot of other things. So, you know, one of the things that I think all the events that have made us do is kind of rethink what we do and why we do it. And you're exactly right. A large number of the calls our officers are dispatched to have nothing to do with law enforcement whatsoever. We're kind of the catch-all, good, bad, or otherwise, for who do we call? We don't know. We'll call the police and they'll sort it out and figure it out. And, you know, so we're asking officers to deal with situations that they don't have a ton of training to deal with and trying to address those issues. So I think, yeah, we're going to continue to explore those. We had some initial discussions, but we'll continue to explore that with both you know, other city agencies as well as non-governmental organizations like Horizon Behavioral Health and folks like that, to see how do we better serve our community. And in doing that, we might actually free up some of our law enforcement resources, right, to be out there dealing with the things they need to be dealing with.
Okay, and thank you for that. And also, I know a lot of calls that I get or emails or either personal family situations. People are pulled over for things like, which can evolve into other escalation or if not de-escalated. Their car smells like drugs. tags expired. Tinted windows beyond what the state of Virginia allows, multiple stops of the same vehicles that now we're seeing videos. I've had videos sent to me of community members where there have been multiple stops. And so the challenges of that and what we're seeing now that evolve into situations where a man died in front of everyone's eyes, was murdered. And the balance of that is what I'm asking the community to continue to be in this process of dialogue and listening and discussion. Yes. Because some of that I mentioned is not new. I'm a child of the 80s, and so just people were, tinted windows were being, pulled over, people don't understand, people move into town, they have cars from other states that allow really dark, that's just old stuff that I can't say I know how to fix, but what I can say is that I did watch or view some of the funeral today of the person killed in Atlanta last week, and a scenario of the complicated situations that are a part of a lot of what we're talking about. It's not always just one thing. It may, like tags are not always just one thing. It may be an employment issue. It may be that something did not happen that could not allow, that people did not, And so I think as a community, we've got to have some real conversations on all aspects of this. And so, because we have programs in place, we have things and access to resources. I know officers have had workforce pamphlets given to them before, and just to direct people when they come into situations. And so I want people to breathe. I want to breathe. I want my sons to breathe. I want my grandsons to breathe, my relatives. I try to give a personal, sometimes, situation, but, my own father was pulled over by an officer at 72 because he was exchanging a mechanic's tool with his friend in a high drug area, which is just his daily path to work and back and forth. And so, but he never told me. And I was, I think, sitting on council. It was a summer or two before he died. And I said, why didn't you tell me? And he said, well, when he asked me to pop the trunk, I popped the trunk. My dad golfed. He had golf clubs in the trunk. He said, it didn't bother me, But that's not the case for everyone. Right. And so I look at that situation, even for my own relative, it's personal. It becomes personal when these things happen more so in certain communities than others. And so I appreciate that you've taken the time to listen. I ask that you continue to listen. I ask that all of the organizations that are coming together work together to present the concerns, to present the questions and the discussion, and come to the listening sessions. Come to the listening sessions, okay, to give voice. And I think I've touched all the points I wanted to say. We got a lot of work to continue to do on both ends. And it's not going to happen overnight, but change will happen where change needs to happen. I think we all are in a new era of awakening, and if not, you will be awakened soon. So this is not going away. It's not going away. The resolve of young people, the resolve of communities to get better, the resolve of communities to stand up once again against things like systemic racism. Sometimes there's a purposeful and intentional denial that it exists, but we cannot deny it. Young people, I'm asking them to work with the older generations. The older generations understand where we've come from. And so we are in this moment to be better in the future. So we have to have intentionality about it. And I'm just asking all of the departments the administration, and all of the citizens to work together in a greater way, because I want my grandsons and other folks' granddaughters and children to not have to keep going through these struggles of racism and violence over just doing what's right for humanity. So thank you very much for your presentation. It's gone very long. I was very long-winded, but I want people to understand we get all the emails and the calls, and we hear, and where we can meet, we do. Where we can respond, we can. But I always take the opportunity when I'm in the council chamber, because process and change, there is a process for change. It's slow, government, the wheels move slow sometimes, but when forced, I tell people, don't let your foot off the gas. Don't. And don't go to sleep at the wheel. So, all right, thank you. If there's, oh, yes, I'm sorry.
I just have a brief request.
Okay.
Councilmember Wilder's point earlier, and then the point you followed up with about communication. Without objection from council, I'd like to request that the document that you shared with us, that is a public document, is posted online in our agenda package, be put on the front page, maybe a link to it on the front page of the city website, as well as on the LPD website, so that people can read it and not have to hunt for it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
All right,
if there are
thank
no
you.
other discussion points, all right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, next is consideration of approving recommended revisions to City Code 7-42, tethering restrictions, and this says the chief. Will you be giving?
I'm actually going to ask our Chief Animal Warden, Ryan Ball, who I believe is
Oh,
coming
okay.
up here.
Is
He
he
will
still
speak
here?
much more intelligently to it than I will, so
All right, thank
I'll let him
you.
do that.
Thank you.
Good evening, Council. The amendment to the city ordinance from last year, the state, they changed the definition of some of the animal code, so we felt it was wise to amend the current ordinance to include some of the verbiage on tethering. So all we did with this is take the old code from last year and amend it with what the state voted for and actually approved to go into effect July 1 of this year, and just put it together to make one tethering ordinance so the citizens can have one paper. They're not looking at a local ordinance, they're not looking at a state code. That way they can go to one source and have it all there for them in regards to tethering.
All right. Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the recommended revisions to City Code?
Second.
Motion's been made and second. Is there any further discussion?
Yes, I mean, I think that the amendments as presented make sense. Obviously, it's in line with state code, and they're being offered to keep us in compliance with state law. I think I'm obviously really glad that the tethering ordinance was passed by council over, I don't know, a year ago now, and that the police department, I really want to commend the warden and his team and the chief for really living this ordinance and making it effective here in the community. So thank you very much, and thanks for bringing this to us tonight.
Thank you. Councilmember Waddle? All right, Vice Mayor Dolan?
I just have a question. What is it between number 6 and number 9? What's the difference between a severe weather warning and a hurricane warning?
Excuse me. Sorry, one second, let me pull it up.
I would have thought those would have been one item since they're national service.
Okay, number 6, okay.
I guess they felt they just needed to spell it out, huh?
Number 6 is a little more narrow. Number 6 specifically says a hurricane tropical storm warning. Number 9 is a little broader, and it says a severe weather warning, including a winter storm, a tornado,
Right.
a severe thunderstorm warning. So they're very similar, but 9 is broader. And what this proposal does is this is the law regardless of what Lynchburg does in its
I got it.
ordinance.
I got it.
The General Assembly has adopted. We're just trying to make our ordinance consistent with state law so there won't be any confusion among citizens with what the law is. But 9 is just includes, while they're very similar to 6, it just includes more categories than
Got it.
6.
Thank you.
Councilmember Heggelson?
Thank you, Mayor. With this, B1 was interesting. You can't tether between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. Over this last crisis when there was a curfew placed. We heard from citizens that couldn't walk their dog because they weren't allowed to be out at curfew, and they couldn't tether their dog because of this. And so yeah, I'm wondering if that time frame is critical, or that time frame should be moved to something a little better. People work different shifts. It's not just everybody has the luxury of working a normal shift, but sometimes if somebody comes in at midnight and put their dog out for a little bit, now they're, committing a crime. So I'm wondering if those time frames should be changed somewhat, especially in light of the fact that we did have citizens saying, how can I take my dog out? We have a curfew and now we have a tethering restriction, and it just kind of caught in between law after law. So
Thank you. Councilmember Wright?
I suppose I appreciate Councilmember Helgeson's point. This was considered to be best practice. Sorry, I always forget I'm wearing it. It was considered to be best practice. It was certainly what the folks in the community who were calling on council to adopt the tethering ordinance recommended. Certainly, it is also the time frame that the department has been spending the past over a year, educating the public about. So I think to make an adjustment to it now would require just a lot of additional education. After I think it's already been found that it's working and it's best practice, and it would require an extensive amount of additional effort on behalf of the police department to reemphasize any adjustments to those times.
do you think that'd be a big adjustment to change the hours? That it would make people who happen to get up a little bit earlier, or when the sun is still out, or is that a difficulty to?
Well, I think part of the police department has done an education campaign about the ordinance, including the hours, and that's obviously a pretty sort of central component of the ordinance. Obviously,
Council, but these were the hours that were come up with by large groups in the community, the Humane Society, the Commonwealth Attorney's Office, the Police Department, a number of other organizations came together to work on this. So council might want to consider whether or not it's going to change the hours that were really arrived at by community consensus without asking the community to offer their input, once again. This was a joint effort. It wasn't something that just the city came up with on its own. It was a community effort to decide that these were the appropriate hours to ban tethering. And one of the factors was that people go to bed, and if your dogs are tethered out in the yard, they tend to bark, and it disturbs people when they're during the nighttime when they're trying to sleep. But that is the history of those. It wasn't just the city. It was a consensus effort by a number of different community groups.
thank you.
Well, and this is state law, so we're trying to be consistent.
Well, I don't think this number is.
No, this number is not a state. This is not in the state code. This was the number that the city of Lynchburg came up with in the work that everybody put into on
And
the
that's why I
ordinance.
offered this, because of the fact that we've seen now something that happened because of city government saying you can't be out because of a curfew for a certain time. And we actually had citizens that were caught in the crosshairs. So the point is, maybe we should, recognize and have a little more freedom for our citizens that actually care about their pets, rather than just making some bad assumptions of people.
And just to clarify, everything that's underlined on the first page is everything that's state approved and what we're amending into the ordinance.
All right, thank you. Any further discussion?
Madam Mayor?
Yes, Councilmember Carroll.
There's several parts of this ordinance that I've got that had problems with. However, I think that the changes to it actually alleviate some of those concerns. One of the things I do like about it, gives the animal warden discretion, which that discretion wasn't there previously. And I think that's important because, as we discussed when implementing this ordinance, for instance, you've got a Siberian Husky that likes to be outside in the winter because it feels nice and cool to them. Well, the animal warden can help make those discretionary calls based on the individual needs of the animals. That wasn't in there before. So whereas I didn't support this ordinance at the beginning, I think that some of these changes do make improvements to it. I'll be supporting it now. And if you want, I'll make a motion to adopt it.
Thank you. Is there a second? All right, the motion's been made and second.
Oh, maybe we had. Oh, yeah, that's right. You'd made it in. Sorry.
Wait a minute. Oh, I'm sorry. The two.
I got lost.
Blame it on 11 o'clock. Sorry. Okay, thank you. Any further discussion from anyone else? All right, then I will thank you. Thank you for being around this late. I will call for a voice vote on approval of this. Councilmember Nelson?
Aye.
Councilmember Wilder?
Aye.
Councilmember Wright?
Aye.
Councilmember Pero?
Aye.
Councilmember Helgelson?
No.
Vice Mayor Dolan?
Aye.
And I will be voting aye as well. The motion passes 6-1. Thank you very much. Next is the second reading on the adoption of the fiscal year 2021 budget resolutions. Consideration of adopting resolution R-20-042, adopting the fiscal year 2021 general fund operating budget, excluding external service providers, and appropriating $194,398,344 for this budget. Is there a motion? Motion has been made and second. Is there further discussion? All right, any further discussion from other council members? Councilmember Helgelson.
But this is the second reading of this, so I'm not going to reiterate. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Is no other discussion? I'll call for a voice vote with a majority needed. Councilmember Nelson?
Aye.
Councilmember Wilder?
Aye.
Councilmember Wright?
Aye.
Councilmember Pero?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Helgelson? I'm sorry. Has it been a long night or not? Councilmember Helgelson?
Helgeson. So maybe you got the other one. Both of those are wrong. So
I was trying to say
Councilmember
Helgeson.
Helgeson. There we go. Okay. No.
And for the viewing audience, say your name, because people
Helgeson.
I say it that way, and they'll say, "Oh, it's wrong."
Hagelson is what you keep saying.
Helgeson.
But, so it's a lot of people don't like to cuss, and I appreciate your fine, upstanding nature of church. So a lot of people say Hagelson, Helgeson. So just remind them.
Well, I say Helgeson, and
Yes.
they try to correct me, so I just wanted to make sure. Vice Mayor Dolan, thank you.
What are we doing?
You're voting.
Aye.
I am voting aye, and the motion passes 6-1. Thank you very much. Consideration of adopting a resolution R-20-044, adopting the fiscal year 2021 discretionary external service providers budget for Virginia Legal Aid Society and appropriating $12,167 for this budget. Is there a motion? Motion has been made. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been made and second. Any further discussion? All right, any further discussion?
Nope.
Thank you. I will call for a voice vote. Councilmember Nelson?
Aye.
Councilmember Wilder?
Aye.
Councilmember Wright?
Aye.
Councilmember Pero?
No.
Councilmember Helgelson?
No.
Vice Mayor Dolan?
Aye.
And I will vote aye, and the motion passes. Thank you very much. Next is consideration of adopting an ordinance to amend and reenact Section 2-363.2 of the Code of the City of Lynchburg, 1981, relating to the assessment of courthouse security fees. And Ms. Witt will give a summary of this.
Section 2-363.2 of the Code of Virginia allows for a fee to be charged in each criminal or traffic case in circuit court, juvenile and domestic relations district court, and the general district court in each case where the defendant is convicted of a violation of any statute or ordinance. As of July 1st, 2020, the fee is increased from $10 to $20, and this is simply requesting that council follow state code and that we also increase our fee from $10 to $20.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt the ordinance?
So moved.
Thank you. The motion's been made. A second?
Second.
And second. Is there further discussion?
Amen.
I'll
Thank you.
just say that this is on, somebody that was convicted, and it's a fee for the service, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. If there's no further discussion, I'll call for a voice vote. Councilmember Nelson?
Aye.
Councilmember Wilder?
Aye.
Councilmember Wright?
Aye.
Councilmember Pero?
Aye.
Councilmember Helgeson?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dolan?
Aye.
And I will vote aye, and the motion passes 7-0. Is there a consideration of amending Section 27-5 of the City Code relating to the possession of tobacco products, nicotine vapor products, and alternative nicotine vapor products by persons under 21 years of age, so it will be consistent with the state code? And I'll turn to Mr. Irwin.
Council, this is a housekeeping measure. Since 1931, Lynchburg has had an ordinance prohibiting the possession of or sale to tobacco products by minors. Our ordinance has always paralleled the state code. The state code was amended to not only include tobacco products, but as a result of all the health problems caused by vaping, to prohibit the possession of vaping products, nicotine products by minors as well. So what this does is just bringing our city code section into compliance with the state code, so they'll be consistent with one another. The reason for we have both is that even without we could repeal this section in the city code. We're not required to have it. The reason the city often adopts ordinances that parallel state laws is because the city gets to keep the fines that are imposed for violations of the city code, while fines that are imposed for violations of state law go to the state. So since the police department is enforcing this and we fund the police department, having a city ordinance on the books can help the cities cover the cost of the police officers who provide the law enforcement services.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the amending section? Councilmember Hackelson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. With this, when I first read it, it's really troubling. And I realize it's housekeeping and just to comply with state law and whatever that's got adopted to take effect July 1st. But as you really kind of sit back and think about this, and what I'd like to see us do is maybe just table this indefinitely, rather than having to hurry up and comply with something when we kind of sit back and think about it. I'm not a smoker or a vapor or anything like that, but I do recognize that we have 18-year-olds that can go fight and die in war. My dad served in the Pacific in World War II. You think about these guys that are in Afghanistan, and you can go fight and die and storm the beaches of Normandy, but you can't have a legal product that's a cigarette without being charged. It's really just kind of, really troubling. The fact of what's it going to be next? 40? Where does this time frame end? When you have somebody that can actually give your life for their country to keep you safe, but you can't have a cigarette because somebody passed the law, and we're going to quickly adopt to that. I think we should really kind of think about our citizens, and we should think about freedom. We should think about education, too. Education isn't just about telling somebody what to do. It's allowing people to make choices. Sometimes people make choices that are bad choices. Sometimes they make good choices. That's part of learning. And so having this is something, I understand the state has adopted it, but there's no way I want to vote in favor of it. I think a better option would be for us, as the city attorney said, we don't have to adopt it. other than maybe getting a few bucks, but I think our officers got lots of other things to do, as you mentioned in the last presentation. You don't want somebody pulling somebody over because of the fact that they had an out-of-date inspection or a tinted window. And now you see somebody walking down the street smoking a cigarette, and now there's probable cause. How old are you? Are you 18? You 19? Are you 22? So anyway, I think it'd be best if we just tabled this. I'm not in a hurry to adopt it, so I'll make a motion that we table item 20 with regarding amending code section 27.5 of our city code.
Motion has been made. Is there a second? I'll second that. All right, the motion has been made and second to table the amending section 27.5. Further discussion?
Nothing to add.
I think it warrants some discussion. I understand the need to parallel state code. I'm very concerned about the fines because certainly the city needs the revenue generated from the fines. But if we're going to get into a long discussion about the pros and cons of this, I think that tabling it makes sense as opposed to getting into it. Can I ask Mr. Irwin if there's a time limit?
No, I would just say that if council has concerns about this ordinance, I suggest you just repeal it, because this is the law. The reality is it doesn't matter what council does tonight with this ordinance. This is a state law. It is going to be enforced. But I really don't think it's really good practice for the city to have an ordinance on the books that's inconsistent with state law. If council says we don't want this ordinance because we think it's an infringement, that's council's right, but council really then just ought to repeal the ordinance because this is the law. There is no choice. It's going to be enforced whether we have a local ordinance or not. The General Assembly has made this decision that, vaping products should not be allowed by people under a certain age, and council doesn't have the right to second guess that. What council has the right to do to say, well, we don't want to have a local ordinance since there's a state law on the books. We don't need a local ordinance. But if we're going to table it, it really doesn't do anything because it doesn't really change the outcome. And if council doesn't want think a local ordinance is appropriate, then we ought to repeal it. Now, there was some concerns expressed when that issue came up. We always consider that. Do we need the ordinance? It was like, well, remember last year vaping was a big issue. So many young people were developing problems that they thought, well, it would send the wrong message if the city repealed the ordinance, that it would send the message that the city really isn't committed or recognizing this as a serious health condition among young people. But that's up to council, but I would say either amend it or repeal it. Tabling it really doesn't accomplish anything.
Well, I was suggesting so that the council may have a larger conversation. I think repealing it may be worthwhile if it doesn't have a fiscal impact to the city, but that's your discussion. And, I know we don't want to have a long discussion about this tonight.
And that's why I suggested tabling it rather than going on a whole discourse about it. Absolutely.
Can I ask a question? Is there any liability for us not having an ordinance or not being in
because it's a
alignment?
state law. I mean, if there's a violation, it would be covered under state law, and I think council does need to know there isn't a lot of money associated with this. If the city repealed the ordinance, it wouldn't be losing a lot of money. I did check with the police department, and the police department does not, issue a lot of citations for violation of this ordinance. It's just, we've got an ordinance on the books. Our ordinance is inconsistent with state law. We either should repeal it or bring it into conformance with state law.
Thank you. Councilmember Wilder, followed by Councilmember Wright and Councilmember Nelson.
Just to make sure I understand, so we're just trying to get our ordinance in line with what the state is saying, what the state law is.
Yes.
So, okay, thank you. That's what I thought.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Councilmember Wright.
Thank you. I guess I appreciate the concerns raised. I will be opposing this motion. I would like to vote on it tonight. I think it's a reasonable, as Mr. Irwin said, it's going to be enforced. It is state law. We might as well collect the fines and use them here in our locality. So I think we should vote on it this evening.
Thank you. Councilmember Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It certainly is state law. It's going to be enforced. That's not going to change. The question is the nuances that could lead to some protracted conversation tonight. It's a late hour. We still have an agenda to deal with. I would ask Councilmember Helgeson if he would agree to, in his motion, specifically state that this will come back at our next meeting so it doesn't linger and have Lynchburg have an ordinance on his books that is inconsistent with state law for more than a couple of weeks.
So then the motion, not rather than tabling indefinitely, would be tabling until, who's got the calendar? What's our next meeting?
14th, I think.
July 14th.
Which means we can probably talk about it well before 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
So I would support the motion if that were the case.
Okay.
Can you support that, Mr. Wright?
I will not be voting. I'd rather vote on it this evening.
Because if you look at the prior action, you know, for example, which when the law changed, it was voted on after the law changed, because this law changes July 1st. So we're actually,
We're playing catch-up. This law was changed last year.
oh, it's not for this July 1st?
So we're playing catch-up with a law that's already on the books.
I know personally I'll be voting no for the motion, so I would rather just go ahead. It's a law. We've got to comply with it. Our officers, whoever, have to comply with it. So I will, did you accept the amendment of the motion? No. Okay, you,
It's a friendly
Oh, no,
amendment.
yeah.
right, you accepted the friendly
Yeah, I
amendment.
changed it to
Okay.
the date.
Should we vote on the?
So where are we?
We are voting on whether to
table.
table this until July 14th for the purpose of future discussion.
A vote in favor is to table, a vote against is to vote on it ultimately tonight.
Any further discussion or thoughts?
No.
Okay, thank you. Then I will call for the voice vote. I'm sorry.
No, I'm ready to vote.
Councilmember Nelson?
Aye.
Councilmember Wilder?
No.
Councilmember Wright?
No.
Councilmember Pero?
Yes.
Councilmember Helgeson?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Dolan? No. I will vote no as well, so the motion is defeated. Go ahead,
I
please.
make a motion that we approve the amendment as it is.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. The motion has been made in second, and any further discussion? All right, thank you. Any further discussion? Councilmember Helgeson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. You know, one reason with this is the fact of, you know, when somebody, well, I'm not going to get in a long protracted thing. I think it's, you know, we should think about our citizens as best as we can. So I'll leave that alone. But I'll be
Councilmember-
voting against it. I just doesn't sound very judicious to me. You know, I don't think anybody's ever been pulled over for driving while under the influence of smoking or vaping, you know, so it's a personal situation that somebody has, so it's just not very comforting.
Thank you. Councilmember Pero.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just think we should repeal it, honestly. So I'm going to vote against this unless, we can belabor the point and make a substitute motion to repeal, but I don't think that'll just serve to drive the meeting longer. So I think we should just repeal it because if it's state code, and it stands, and we don't have to do the clerical work, and no offense to Mr. Irwin, but catch up on something that's changed in state code a year later. It takes some of the work. We don't have to have that workload in that office. So if we could repeal it, that'd make life easier for everybody while still enforcing the ordinance, while still enforcing the code. Thanks.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Dolan.
Thank you. Well, to me, this is really a health issue, and I think we've had a lot of communication from Dr. Dagan and some other medical people around town who would really like us to put this in force. And I think if it's a state law, why not have it? First off, I don't think it's going to be a revenue producer because I don't think that 16, 17, 18, 19-year-olds have any money, but that's another issue.
Thank you. Councilmember Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Whether we change the ordinance or not, our police officers and law enforcement personnel are going to enforce the 21-year-old standard against whatever citizen may come into the province of a law enforcement officer. The only question in my mind is who gets the money from the fine. And if there's going to be a payment, I would rather the city get it because our city courts and our city personnel are going to enforce it unless it's a state police officer or a deputy sheriff. So I'll be supporting the modification and adoption.
Thank you.
But we are now 6 minutes later than when I last spoke.
I got you. Thank you very much. If there's no further discussion, I'll call for the voice vote. Councilmember Nelson?
Aye.
Councilmember Wilder?
Aye.
Councilmember Wright?
Aye.
Councilmember Pero?
No.
Councilmember Helgeson?
No.
Vice Mayor Dolan?
Aye.
And I will vote aye as well, and the motion passes 5-2. Thank you. Next is to make reappointments to vacancies that will exist June 30th, 2020 in School Board Districts 1, 2, and 3. Can I have a motion or vote to appoint Dr. Robert A. Brennan to District 1, Dr. Kimberly A. Senna to District 2, and Dr. James A. Coleman to District 3?
So moved.
Thank you. The motion has been made. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. The motion has been made and second. Any further discussion? Thank you. And I will call, if no further discussion, for the voice vote. Councilmember Nelson?
Aye.
Councilmember Wilder?
Aye.
Councilmember Wright?
Aye.
Councilmember Pero?
Aye.
Councilmember Helgeson?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dolan?
Aye.
Thank you, and I'll be voting aye, and the motion passes. Next is consideration of adopting a resolution approving the deferral of the city manager's retirement date from July 1, 2020 to September 1, 2020. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. The motion has been made and second for that. Is there any further discussion?
Madam Mayor, I believe that the city manager has offered to postpone her retirement because of her concern for the continuity of operations for the city during this unparalleled series of crises. It's been acknowledged that the search could be more robust, let me say, and it's very nice of you to be willing to postpone the time. But that being said, I hope this search doesn't go on but so much longer, because I'm certain you won't want to postpone it again. So I want to thank you for the offer. Thank you for your service to the city, and thank you to Keith Tyree for what it is Tyree, right? No, Keith Stevens. My apologies. And thank you for Keith Stevens, your husband, for allowing the city to allowing you to serve the city for a couple more months. So thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion?
Again, I just want to thank you for amending your time period. Again, we are seeing some unprecedented time with COVID, with everything that's going on in our country, in our nation, in our community, with budget challenges. So I think we need some continuity while we kind of tunnel our way through all of this. So I think it's a challenging time to be hiring someone and bring them in the midst of all of this going on. So I appreciate you making this change for us, for the citizens of Lynchburg. We appreciate your service. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Councilmember Helgeson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. With this, I just kind of look back in time and think of how we got here and what we're going to do going forward. Back several months ago, through after reviews and whatnot, we heard the city manager was planning on retiring. And with that, we all kind of said, oh, makes sense. It makes sense that she's going to retire. Been here, ready to retire, kind of, everybody thought, okay, makes sense. Wasn't a hue and cry saying, hey, you got to stay. With that, we then began a process that started recruiting, started looking. Everybody kind of understood, this isn't going to be a laundry list of bad policies or bad actions or anything. I think it's a fact of we've gone down a path that said, let's begin. As she said, she's going to retire. Let's begin that process to look for another city manager. I think we have several options. We have a deputy city manager that could serve as an interim, that could handle that until we find a long-term new city manager. We have other options, whether it be an interim. I think that could happen. I look back at these times, when somebody kind of says they're going to retire, and we respect those years of service, and we appreciate that. After somebody kind of says they're going to retire and kind of I look back in these last 6 months, I think there was lots of things that maybe, probably would have been done a little bit differently, but easy to second guess. But when I look back on that, I think, well, somebody's wanting to retire. I've never heard as many times in a budget meeting when I brought up an issue about finance that I heard, oh, I'm appalled, I'm offended, I'm aghast because you've used these words, or talking about numbers in a budget which should be devoid of personal issues. It should be a professional recommendation that looks at a professional number of a budget rather than lashing out and whatnot. So again, I don't want to get personal at all, but I mean, when somebody says that they're ready to retire, their heart is heavy and, we can't do anymore, I think it's time to say we're ready to do what we're going to do, and that's begin a new process, begin with the new city manager. I think this council should have somebody that's eager and ready. The citizens should have somebody that's eager and ready. I think the city employees should have somebody that's eager and ready. Rather than saying, hey, let's amend it and just stay a few extra months, or again, I recognize things are going to happen the way they happen, and we'll deal with it. Some of these problems and some of these issues, I think we could have really handled a lot differently, but I believe it's time for us to move on. We have interims, we have other options, and I think we should go on with that. This right here says we're going to have a resolution that says this is going to continue for another 3 months. You may want to amend that because we're in the process of actually looking and recruiting and interviewing. So if you want to have it set in stone, or if you'd rather look at something a little more flexible, that may be an option. But I think for the good of all, and that's even for the good of the city manager, who said her heart's heavy. I mean, I think you kind of let somebody, we appreciate the offer, but move on, so.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Dolan.
Thank you very much. That's an interesting spin, by the way. Remember, we asked Bonnie to stay, and she was gracious enough to say she would postpone her retirement for not 3 months, but 2 months. And she has 21 years in city government, and I think it's in the best interest of the citizens of this city that we keep the leadership in place that we have for the next 2 months. We have someone who, with 21 years of government experience, obviously somebody who cares deeply about our city, and someone who has the expertise in the leadership. Quite frankly, I'm of the opinion that it is just not sound judgment to put somebody in place for 2 months, perhaps somebody that is not familiar with the city, not familiar with current issues, and that we are in the middle of a pandemic. To think about a 2-month interim who may not have that good judgment, the developed relationships she has, the trust, the inspirational, the knowledge, the institutional knowledge, the known leadership that we have in the current manager just does not compute with me at all. So I would support the resolution.
Thank you. Councilmember Wright.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm wondering if perhaps we could make a small adjustment that might make everybody feel comfortable, and recognizing and appreciating the city manager's offering to extend her service and offering our thanks for that. I wonder if all parties might be comfortable with the idea that we extend until September 1 until and if council working with the city manager selects somebody else, because I think it's possible that we might not wind up our city manager search by the end of August, and we might actually be seeking an interim for perhaps a longer period of time. So I'm wondering if we could modify, would people be comfortable with just saying that council, the city, we are gracious and we accept the city manager's gracious offer to extend until September 1 or until an interim has been selected. Would that be sufficient? Would that make everybody?
Extending it, or?
No. So accept it from July 1 to September 1st, 2020, unless council selects, in consultation with the city manager, an interim.
Someone before that time.
Prior to September 1st. Does that sound good to everybody?
Yeah.
And in that way, we're.
Well,
No?
No, because if you want to make that as an amendment, then we could certainly debate it, but I'd rather not accept that as a friendly amendment. I won't go into the reasons now, but if you want to make that as an amendment, I'll go.
No, I don't. I don't feel that strongly about it. I was just trying to find a common ground.
I would just say that for me personally, we are and have been searching for a city manager. We have been recruiting with a recruiting company. We have received applications. We are in the process of potentially interviewing candidates, and that process has been ongoing through an unprecedented pandemic and unprecedented tensions within our country with police departments, racial issues, protests, and several other issues just over the months that have occurred. And so I don't want the misrepresentation or mischaracterization of the city manager's extension of her retirement to be put before the public as though our city manager has in some way not done her job for the past 20 years as she has done graciously and exceptionally in the past 6 months. I personally asked, and in consultation with council members, the recommendation of asking the city manager to stay a little bit longer, because it is unprecedented time to try to recruit for city managers for many reasons that I will not go into because it's for personal discussion during closed sessions. But I am just saying that we have to appreciate the work, the diligence, the dedication, and the commitment of a strong veteran city manager who did defer her retirement on our behalf and our citizens' behalf to help navigate us through unprecedented and challenging times in a community of 82,000 people of that amount of folks. And I appreciate that you have done it. I appreciate that you have done it graciously, and at no time were your words should have been misconstrued other than, like all of us, our hearts are heavy for a community and a nation right now and what we are currently going through. I realize that not everyone takes that seriously, and everyone does not believe that people are going through unprecedented times at the moment. However, I thank you for doing that. And so I would like to continue the resolution as is. I appreciate Councilmember Wright for trying to find some way to help bring everybody into the fold. But I appreciate this conversation, and I'm going to call for the vote right now. So can we please have the vote? It has been made and second on consideration of adopting a resolution approving the deferral of the city manager's retirement date from July 1, 2020 to September 1, 2020. Councilmember Nelson.
Aye.
Councilmember Wilder.
Aye.
Councilmember Wright.
Aye.
Councilmember Pero.
Aye.
Councilmember Helgeson.
No.
Vice Mayor Dolan?
Aye.
And I am voting aye, and the motion passes. Thank you very much. Next is consideration of a closed meeting to consider appointments and scheduling of prospective candidates for the position of city manager pursuant to Section 2.2-3711A1 of the Code of Virginia. And B, consideration of a closed meeting to discuss appointment to the following boards, commissions, or committees: Youth Services Citizens Board pursuant to Section 2.2-3711A1 of the Code of Virginia, and consideration of a closed meeting from consultation with legal counsel and briefings by staff members regarding a legal matter requiring the provision of legal advice, specifically legal matters relating to the Region 2000 Services Authority member use agreement for the disposal of solid waste and the distribution of excess revenue pursuant to Section 2.2-3711A7 of the Code of Virginia, 1950. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. And a second?
Yes, second.
All right, thank you. And that second? All right, can I have a voice vote? Councilmember Nelson.
Aye.
Councilmember Wilder.
Aye.
Councilmember Wright.
Aye.
Councilmember Pero.
Aye.
Councilmember Helgeson.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dolan.
Aye.
And I'll vote aye. We are now in closed meeting. Thank you.